Welcome to Zoe Appleton Bedtime Stories, a collection of sizzling romantic novels perfectly crafted to whisk you away before bed. These hot and punchy stories will take you on a thrilling roller coaster of love, passion, and adventure, perfect for any romance lover. In our first novel, Juliet's Game, follow Juliet as she embarks on a heart-pounding journey of self-discovery and romance. Who is she? And more importantly, who does she want to become as she navigates the complexities of love? If you enjoy Juliet's Game and crave more steamy stories, be sure to visit zoeappletonwriter.com for more of Zoe's irresistible romance novels, including Claimed by My Boss, Into the Shadows, and Betting on Ruby. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, where we'll be sharing new audiobooks, short stories, and even original romantic songs. Now, without further delay, dive into Juliet's Game and let the passion begin. Chapter 1. The Game Begins. The chandelier above me sparkled like 1,000 tiny stars, casting soft light over the sea of silk gowns and tailored suits. The sound of crystal clinking and polite laughter filled the air, masking the undercurrent of tension that always came with these events. It was a game, this world of debutantes and heirs, a game of power, of alliances, and of deals brokered in dark corners. And I hated it. I sipped my champagne, eyes scanning the grand ballroom with the precision of someone who'd grown up in its shadow. My father was somewhere, schmoozing with his business partners, no doubt congratulating himself on how well he'd played his hand. My mother was a few steps away, making subtle yet pointed comments about my posture, my dress, my smile, everything designed to remind me that tonight was not for me. It was for them, for the family, for the future. My future, apparently. I forced a smile, one that didn't quite reach my eyes. Tonight was the night I was expected to make an impression, to charm the right people, and to secure my place as a loyal pawn in my family's empire. I knew what was coming: the arranged marriage, the contract signed in gold ink, the lifetime of playing by their rules. But I had other plans. Plans that didn't involve being anyone's pawn. I adjusted the bodice of my deep emerald gown, the silky fabric whispering against my skin. The debutante ball was supposed to be my official entrance into high society, the night I was paraded around like a prized mare, before being handed off to some wealthy, well-bred man. Bored already? A low, smooth voice murmured at my ear. I didn't turn, didn't flinch. I'd felt him before I'd heard him, like a shadow creeping across the floor. My pulse quickened, but I kept my expression neutral, my gaze fixed on the dancers twirling in the center of the ballroom. If you're looking for a dance partner, I replied coolly, you'll have to get in line. The man at my side let out a quiet chuckle, the sound dark and amused. I'm not one for dancing. At least, not the kind they're doing. I finally turned to face him, my breath catching in my throat despite myself. He was tall, his frame draped in a perfectly tailored black suit that looked like it had been custom-made to complement the sharp lines of his body. His hair was dark, unruly, like he couldn't be bothered to tame it. But it was his eyes that held me, cold, calculating, like a predator who already knew the outcome of the hunt. And I knew him. Everyone in this room knew him, even if they pretended otherwise. Adrian Blackwood, heir to the Blackwood Empire, one of the wealthiest, most dangerous families in the country. His name carried weight, the kind of weight that crushed anyone foolish enough to stand in his way. I'd seen him before, of course. He would frequent charity galas, business dinners, and other events like this one, but he'd never approached me. Until tonight. I'm not interested in games, I said, my voice steady despite the way my heart was pounding. Everyone's interested in games, he said, his gaze raking over me in a way that made my skin tingle. They just don't always realize they're playing. I raised an eyebrow, meeting his gaze with a defiance I wasn't sure I actually felt. And which game are you playing tonight, Mr. Blackwood? His lips curved into a slow, wicked smile. The same one you are. A shiver ran down my spine. But I held his gaze, refusing to let him see how deeply his presence unnerved me. I'd grown up around men like him, men who thought the world was theirs for the taking, who saw people as pieces on a chessboard. But Adrian was different. He wasn't just playing the game. He was the game. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice quieter now, but no less firm. His eyes darkened, and for a moment I saw something flicker there. Something dangerous, something that sent a warning straight to my gut. But then it was gone, replaced by that same detached, arrogant confidence. "Just a kiss," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "A harmless kiss." I blinked, surprised by the audacity of his request. "Excuse me?" "A kiss," he repeated, taking a step closer, his body radiating heat despite the coolness in his eyes. "One kiss, right here, right now. That's all I want." I stared at him, torn between amusement and suspicion. "You think I'll just—" "What? Kiss you because you asked nicely?" He tilted his head as if considering my question. "No. I think you'll kiss me because you're just as curious as I am." I should have said no. I should have turned and walked away, let him play his little games with someone else. But something about the way he looked at me, the way his words hung in the air like a challenge, made it impossible to resist. "Just one kiss. What could it hurt?" I took a breath, then nodded. "Fine. One kiss." His smile widened, and before I could second-guess my decision, he closed the distance between us, his hand sliding to the small of my back. His touch was warm, firm, but not forceful. And then his lips were on mine, soft at first, then more insistent, more demanding. The room seemed to disappear, the music fading into the background as the heat between us flared, hot and undeniable. I pulled back after a moment, breathless, my heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with the kiss, and everything to do with the man standing in front of me. "See," he murmured, his lips brushing against my ear. "That wasn't so bad, was it?" I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of desire that clouded my thoughts. "You got your kiss. Now, if you'll excuse me." "Oh, I'm afraid it's not that simple," he interrupted, his voice turning cold. "That kiss wasn't just for fun. It was a declaration." My stomach twisted, dread settling in. "A declaration of what?" "That you belong to me now." His gaze hardened, the playful glint gone. "And I don't share." Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, stunned, as the weight of his words crashed over me. Whatever game I thought I was playing, Adrian Blackwood had just changed the rules. Chapter 2. Checkmate. I stood frozen in place, Adrian's words echoing in my head. "You belong to me now." He'd said it so casually, as if claiming a person was as easy as signing a contract. The arrogance, the audacity. My blood boiled, but beneath the anger, a different kind of fear stirred. Because he wasn't just some arrogant playboy trying to rattle me. Adrian Blackwood had the power to make good on his threats. I needed to clear my head. My feet moved almost of their own accord, carrying me through the crowd of glittering elites, past their champagne toasts and hollow laughter, until I reached the terrace. The cool night air hit my skin like a splash of water, and I took a deep breath, gripping the stone railing as I tried to regain my composure. What just happened? 1 minute, I had been going through the motions, doing exactly what was expected of me at my family's endless parade of high society events. The next, I had been swept into a dangerous game with a man who played by his own twisted rules. The night sky stretched out above me, stars scattered like diamonds against the velvet darkness. I could hear the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore below, but even the peaceful rhythm of the ocean couldn't drown out the storm inside me. "Yes," a familiar voice drawled from the shadows. "Adrian Blackwood?" I turned, my heart skipping a beat as Carter Hamilton stepped into the moonlight. He was every bit as handsome as Adrian, but in a different way. Where Adrian's darkness was palpable, Carter was all charm and light, the kind of man who could make you feel like you were the only person in the world when he looked at you. "How did you know?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because I saw the way he looked at you," Carter said, leaning against the railing beside me. "And I know the way men like him think. Men like him." The words hung heavy in the air. Carter was one of them, part of this elite circle of power and wealth, prince in his own right. But he had always been different, or so I'd thought. Where Adrian was ruthless and calculating, Carter seemed kinder, more human. "Did he threaten you?" Carter asked, his gaze sharp as he studied my face. I let out a bitter laugh. He didn't have to. He just kissed me and declared I'm his property now, like we're living in some medieval fiefdom. Carter's jaw tightened, his expression darkening. "That sounds like Adrian." I glanced at him, my curiosity piqued. "You know him well?" "We grew up together," Carter admitted, his voice tinged with something that almost sounded like regret. "Our families ran in the same circles, went to the same schools, though we were never friends." Something in his tone made me pause. Carter hesitated, then sighed. "Because Adrian's father is ruthless, and Adrian learned from the best. To him, everything's a game. People, emotions, love. It's all just a means to an end." I felt a chill run down my spine, not just from his words, but from the way they mirrored everything I had just seen in Adrian's eyes. He didn't want me. He wanted control, power. "Though why me?" I asked, more to myself than to Carter. "What does he gain by claiming me like that?" Carter's silence was heavy, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost hesitant. "Because you're the key to the most valuable piece on the board. Your family's company." I blinked, caught off guard. "What?" Carter turned to face me fully, his expression serious. "Your father's company is a cornerstone in this city. Whoever controls it controls a lot more than just wealth. They control influence, power. Adrian doesn't need your money, Juliet. He needs the leverage your family name gives him, and the best way to get it: marry the heiress." My stomach twisted, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with terrifying clarity. Adrian didn't want me because he loved me. He wanted me for what I represented, for what I could give him. "And you?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "What do you want, Carter?" His expression softened, but there was something guarded in his eyes. "I want to help you. Adrian isn't someone you can easily get rid of once he has set his sights on you. If you want out of this, you're going to need an ally." I studied him, weighing my options. On one hand, Carter seemed sincere. He had always been kind to me, always seemed to have my back in this ridiculous world of wealth and power. But on the other hand, he was still one of them, one of the men who played these games for a living. Could I really trust him? "And what do you get out of this?" I asked, my voice cautious. Carter smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Let's just say keeping Adrian in check benefits us both." His answer was vague, but I didn't have time to question him further. The sound of footsteps echoed on the terrace, and I turned to see Adrian emerging from the ballroom, his eyes locked on me. My pulse quickened. I hadn't expected to see him again so soon. He approached with that same confident swagger, his gaze flicking briefly to Carter before settling on me. "You've been gone too long, Juliet," Adrian said, his tone casual but laced with authority. "We're expected inside." I felt my body stiffen at the sound of his voice, my mind racing to figure out my next move. I glanced at Carter, hoping for some sort of signal, but his expression remained neutral, his hands resting casually in his pockets, as if he hadn't a care in the world. Adrian stepped closer, his hand reaching for mine, but I pulled back before he could touch me. His eyes narrowed, but the smile never left his lips. "I don't belong to you, Adrian," I said, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at me. For a moment, his expression faltered, the darkness in his eyes flickering with something unreadable. But then he chuckled softly, his smile widening as if I had just made the game more interesting. "We'll see," he murmured, his voice a velvet threat. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing on the terrace with Carter. The tension in the air was thick, but I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. For now, at least, I had bought myself some time. But time was running out, and I had just become the center of a deadly game. Chapter 3. Caught in the crossfire. I barely slept that night. Adrian's words lingered like a dark cloud in my mind, and no matter how much I tried to shake them off, his presence followed me even in my dreams. I woke up with a jolt, the lingering sensation of his kiss still burning on my lips. "I don't belong to him," I reminded myself, clenching my fists under the soft sheets. "He doesn't control me." But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Adrian Blackwood didn't need to control me directly. He had other ways to tighten his grip. If what Carter said was true, then this wasn't just a dangerous game. It was a game of power, wealth, and alliances. And I was stuck in the middle, a pawn between two powerful forces. I threw on a robe and padded over to the wide bay window of my bedroom, staring out over the city skyline. The towering buildings, the shimmering lights, all of it felt like a gilded cage. My family's empire was vast, rooted deep in the city's financial arteries. My father had worked his entire life to build it, and now Adrian wanted to use me to claim it for himself. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts, and I turned as my mother stepped into the room. She was immaculate as always, her blonde hair swept up in a perfect twist, her designer dress tailored to perfection. "Good morning, darling," she said, her tone as cool and crisp as the morning air. "I thought you'd want to know we've received an interesting proposal." I stiffened, the word "a proposal" sending a wave of unease through me. "From who?" Her smile was tight, her eyes gleaming with the excitement that only came from potential power. "Adrian Blackwood." I swallowed, my heart sinking. "What kind of proposal?" My mother walked over to the window, her gaze flicking briefly over the city before she turned to face me. "He's offered a merger. A very advantageous one, I might add. The Blackwood and Sterling empires would become one, and you, my dear, would be the centerpiece of that merger." I stared at her, my stomach twisting into knots. "You mean he wants to marry me?" She smiled as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "Of course, it's a brilliant move. The two most powerful families joining forces. Think of the influence, the reach. Together, we would be untouchable." I shook my head, disbelief flooding through me. "And you're okay with that? You're okay with me being some bargaining chip?" My mother's smile faltered, but only slightly. "It's not like that, Juliet. This is about securing the future. For all of us. I know it may seem overwhelming, but trust me, marrying Adrian will ensure that our family's legacy remains intact. And you'll benefit from it as well. The Blackwoods are—" No. The word came out harsher than I intended, but I didn't care. "I'm not marrying him, Mother. I don't care how much money or power is at stake." Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw the cold calculation behind her carefully crafted facade. "You don't have a choice, Juliet. This isn't just about you. This is about the family. Your father and I have worked too hard for you to throw it all away on a whim." "A whim?" I snapped, my voice rising. "You're talking about my life, my future. You can't just sell me off to the highest bidder because it suits you." My mother's expression turned icy, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Watch your tone, young lady. You may not realize it now, but this is for your own good. Adrian Blackwood is your future, and you will marry him." She turned on her heel and left the room without another word, leaving me standing there, trembling with anger and disbelief. I had never felt so helpless, so trapped in a situation I couldn't control. My parents had made the decision for me, and Adrian was playing right into their hands. I wasn't going to let them dictate my life. Not anymore. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I glanced at the screen. A text from Carter. "Can we meet? I think I have a way out." I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing. Carter had been clear about Adrian's motives, but now he was offering me a solution. Could I trust him? Could I trust anyone in this world? "Meet me at the park in an hour," I typed back before tossing the phone onto the bed. I needed answers, and if Carter had a plan, I was willing to hear him out. Anything was better than being cornered into a life I didn't want. The park was quiet when I arrived, the crisp October air swirling around me as I made my way to the secluded bench where Carter was waiting. He stood as I approached, his hands shoved into the pockets of his coat, his expression unreadable. "Thanks for coming," he said, his voice low. I crossed my arms, keeping my distance. "What's this plan of yours?" Carter's eyes softened, but there was a flicker of tension in his gaze. "Adrian's made his move, hasn't he?" I nodded, frustration bubbling to the surface. "He's proposed a merger, and my parents are ready to hand me over on a silver platter." Carter exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. I figured he'd make that play. But I think there's a way to stop him. His gaze met mine, sharp and focused. We beat him at his own game. We make a move before he can lock you into that marriage, but we'll need leverage. Leverage. The word sent a chill down my spine. This was exactly the kind of world Adrian thrived in, using people and information as weapons. And now, Carter wanted to play the same game. What kind of leverage? I asked, wariness creeping into my voice. Carter hesitated, his jaw tightening before he spoke. There's something Adrian's hiding. Something big. If we can expose it, we'll have the power to make him back off. I narrowed my eyes, my suspicion growing. And how exactly do you know this? His expression darkened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something like guilt in his eyes. Because I used to be part of it, Adrian and I. We weren't just rivals. We were in business together once, but I got out before things got ugly. He didn't. My heart raced as the pieces started to fall into place. Whatever Carter had been involved in with Adrian, it was dangerous. And now he wanted me to be a part of it. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Because you deserve a choice, Carter said, his voice rough. Adrian's not invincible, but he's ruthless. If you want out, I'll help you. But you need to decide if you're willing to fight back. I stared at him, my mind spinning. Trusting Carter meant diving deeper into the darkness that surrounded Adrian, but refusing him meant resigning myself to a future dictated by power and control. It wasn't much of a choice at all. I took a deep breath, the weight of the decision settling on my shoulders. Okay, I said finally, my voice steady. I'm in. Carter nodded, his eyes gleaming with something like relief. Good. We'll need to move fast. Adrian won't wait long to make his next move. As we stood there in the quiet of the park, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just stepped into something far more dangerous than I realized. Adrian's world was a twisted game of power, and now, with Carter's help, I was about to play my hand. But in this game, there were no guarantees. And if I wasn't careful, I could lose everything. Chapter 4. Into the Lion's Den. The next few days passed in a blur. Every moment felt like walking on a tightrope, balancing between the life I had always known and the one I was about to risk. My mother continued to remind me that my future was set, that Adrian was the right choice for our family. Each conversation we had felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. Adrian's silence over the past few days unnerved me. I expected him to push harder, to make more demands after his proposal, but he had been oddly quiet, leaving me to stew in my thoughts, waiting for his next move. It was a power play. I knew that much. He wanted me to feel the weight of his absence, to let the silence do the work for him. He wanted me to come to him. But that wasn't going to happen. Not on his terms. Carter had been cautious in our interactions since our meeting at the park. He didn't reach out often, but when he did, it was always under the guise of something harmless. A simple text about meeting for coffee. A casual remark in a crowded room. He had to be careful. We both did. Adrian's reach extended further than I had initially thought. If we weren't careful, he'd know what we were up to before we made our move. One evening, after another tense dinner with my parents, I received a message from Carter. It's time. Meet me at the Blackwood Gala tomorrow night. I'll be waiting in the East Wing. The Blackwood Gala. The thought of attending one of Adrian's events made my stomach twist, but it was the perfect cover. The city's elite would be there, a sea of people and opulent distractions. If there was any chance to gain leverage over Adrian without him noticing, this was it. I stared at the message for a moment, my fingers trembling as I typed out my response. I'll be there. The following evening, I stood in front of my mirror, adjusting the elegant black dress that clung to my body in all the right places. The gown was a statement. Bold, defiant. I wasn't going to blend in tonight. If I was going to step into the lion's den, I was going to make sure everyone knew I was there. I pinned up my hair in a sleek twist, leaving a few loose strands to frame my face. My makeup was flawless, but there was a storm brewing in my eyes. Tonight was the night. I would face Adrian, walk into his world, and finally take control of my own fate. As I arrived at the Blackwood estate, the grandeur of it all hit me like a wave. The mansion was sprawling, a testament to the Blackwood family's wealth and influence. The driveway was lined with luxury cars, and the soft glow of chandeliers spilled through the towering windows. The gala was in full swing by the time I stepped inside. Waiters glided through the crowd with trays of champagne, and the sound of laughter and clinking glasses filled the air. Everywhere I looked, there were faces I recognized. Business tycoons, politicians, heirs, and heiresses. This was Adrian's world. These were his people. And then, as if summoned by my thoughts, I saw him. Adrian stood near the grand staircase, dressed in a sharp black tuxedo, his presence commanding as always. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and those piercing blue eyes scanned the room, calculating, watching. A shiver ran down my spine as our gazes met. He smiled, a slow, dangerous smile that sent my heart racing for all the wrong reasons. I forced myself to hold his gaze, refusing to look away. He couldn't know that I was here for anything other than the gala. He couldn't know that tonight. I wasn't just another pawn in his game. Adrian made his way toward me, weaving effortlessly through the crowd, his smile growing as he approached. "Juliet," he said, his voice smooth, almost teasing. "You look stunning. I was beginning to wonder if you would show." I arched an eyebrow, keeping my tone neutral. "And miss one of the most anticipated events of the year? I wouldn't dream of it." He chuckled, but there was an edge to it. "Always so sharp. I admire that about you." Before I could respond, I caught a glimpse of Carter from across the room, standing near the entrance to the east wing, just as we had planned. He gave me a subtle nod, signaling that the time was right. I needed to get away from Adrian. "I think I'll grab a drink," I said, stepping away from him. "Enjoy your evening, Adrian." His hand shot out, grabbing mine before I could fully turn. The contact was firm, almost possessive. "Don't wander too far, Juliet," he said, his voice dropping to a low murmur. "I still have plans for us tonight." I swallowed, forcing a smile. "I'm sure you do." He let go of my hand, watching me as I slipped away into the crowd. My heart pounded in my chest as I made my way toward the east wing, where Carter was waiting. The farther I moved from the main ballroom, the quieter it became. The opulent sounds of the gala faded into the background as I reached the secluded corridor where Carter stood, his expression tense. "Did anyone see you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "No," I replied, glancing over my shoulder to make sure we weren't being followed. "What's the plan?" Carter's eyes darkened. "Adrian keeps his most sensitive documents in a private office. It's just down this hallway. If we can get in, we might be able to find the leverage we need." "And what exactly are we looking for?" He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "Anything that ties him to the darker side of his business. Illegal deals, offshore accounts. Anything could ruin him." I nodded, steeling myself. This was it. There was no turning back now. We moved quickly and quietly through the corridor, stopping in front of a heavy wooden door. Carter pulled out a small device and began working on the lock. My pulse quickened as I glanced around, half expecting Adrian to appear out of nowhere. "Got it," Carter whispered as the door clicked open. We slipped inside, the room bathed in soft amber light. It was exactly what I expected. Polished mahogany furniture, bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes, and a massive desk dominating the center of the room. Carter moved to the desk, rifling through papers while I scanned the shelves for anything out of place. My heart raced as I realized how much danger we were in. If Adrian found us here. "Juliet," Carter's voice was urgent, pulling me from my thoughts. I turned to see him holding a file, his expression grim. "You need to see this." I crossed the room and looked at the document he held out. My blood ran cold as I scanned the page. Offshore accounts, bribery, blackmail. It was all there, laid out in black and white. "This is it," I whispered. "This is the leverage we need." Carter nodded. His expression remained tense. "We need to get out of here before—" The door creaked open behind us, and we both froze. Adrian stood in the doorway, his face unreadable, but his eyes burned with cold fury. "Well, well," he said softly, his voice dangerously calm. I didn't expect to find you two here. My heart stopped. We were caught. Chapter 5. The Devil's Bargain. The air in the room came suffocating, the weight of Adrian's presence stifling as he stood at the threshold, his eyes locking onto me with predatory intensity. For a brief, terrifying moment, I couldn't breathe. My pulse thudded in my ears, and every instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet felt cemented to the floor. Carter tensed beside me, subtly shifting his stance, as if preparing to defend us. But Adrian's gaze didn't flicker toward him. His attention was fixed solely on me. "Oh, my dear Juliet," he drawled, his voice laced with dark amusement. "I didn't expect you to be so adventurous." He took a step forward, letting the door close behind him with an ominous click, sneaking into my private office. Not very ladylike. I swallowed hard, fighting to regain control. The file in Carter's hand felt like a burning brand between us, a dangerous secret that could unravel Adrian's carefully constructed world. I had to say something, anything, to diffuse the tension, but before I could speak, Carter stepped forward, his voice firm. "You don't scare us, Adrian. We know what you've been hiding, and it ends tonight." Adrian's lips curled into a slow, mocking smile, but his eyes remained cold, calculating. "Do you now?" He tilted his head slightly, his gaze flicking to the file in Carter's hand. "And what exactly do you plan to do with that little piece of paper?" Carter's grip tightened around the file. "Expose you. Make sure the world knows what you've been doing behind closed doors. Your empire will crumble, and you'll have no one to blame but yourself." Adrian laughed softly, the sound sending a shiver down my spine. "Carter, my dear boy, haven't we been playing this game for a while now? You have always been so noble, so predictable. But let me ask you something. How do you think this will really end? Do you honestly believe you can walk out of here, waltz into a courtroom, and bring me down with a few documents? You're playing a very dangerous game." He turned his gaze back to me, his smile fading, replaced by something darker. "And you, Juliet, I'm disappointed. I thought you were smarter than this." A cold knot formed in my stomach that I refused to back down. I had come too far to falter now. "I'm not your pawn, Adrian," I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "You think you can control everyone around you, but you don't control me." His eyes narrowed, the amusement in them evaporating. "Don't I?" For a moment, the room was silent, the tension thick and suffocating. I could feel Carter's frustration building beside me, but I knew we were outmatched. Adrian wasn't just a ruthless businessman. He was a master manipulator, always 10 steps ahead. And somehow, he had known this was coming. "Here's the thing," Adrian said, his voice low and dangerous as he took another step toward me. "You have 2 choices, Juliet. You can walk out of here with Carter, holding on to the illusion that you've won something. You can take those documents, throw them into the fire of public scandal, and watch it burn." He paused, his eyes gleaming with menace. "But if you do that, I will destroy you both, piece by piece. Your family, your reputation, your entire life. I will tear it apart. You think you've seen what I'm capable of? You haven't even scratched the surface." A sickening weight settled in my chest. I knew, deep down, that Adrian wasn't bluffing. He had the power, the resources, and the will to make good on his threat. And I had put myself, and Carter, directly in his crosshairs. "Or," Adrian continued, his tone softening as he took yet another step closer until he was standing directly in front of me. "You can choose the second option. You give me the file, walk out of here, and we forget this little indiscretion ever happened." I clenched my fists at my sides, my skin crawling as his eyes roamed over me, calculating, assessing. "And what do I get in return?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Adrian's smile returned, slow and sinister. "Your freedom, your family's safety, and perhaps something more." His gaze flicked to Carter, and the corner of his mouth twisted. "But you'll have to make that choice without him. Don't listen to him, Juliet. He's trying to manipulate you. We can take him down." The weight of the decision pressed down on my shoulders, and for the first time, I realized just how deeply I was trapped in this twisted game. And the more I thought about it, the more I knew that Adrian was right. He had the power to ruin us both. I glanced at Carter, his expression fierce, determined. He believed we could win this fight, but I knew better. Adrian wouldn't let us walk away unscathed. If I chose to fight, the cost would be far more than I was willing to pay. Adrian, sensing my hesitation, took another step closer, his hand reaching out to brush a strand of hair from my face. His touch was gentle, almost tender, but it made my skin crawl. "Choose wisely, Juliet," he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. "There's so much at stake." I flinched away from him, my mind racing. This wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't even about Carter. It was about my family, my future. Adrian was giving me a way out, a way to protect the people I cared about, even if it meant sacrificing something in return. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling as I reached for the file in Carter's grip. He looked at me, shock and betrayal flashing across his face. "Juliet, no." "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice breaking. "But I can't do this." With a heavy heart, I handed the file to Adrian, who took it with a smug smile, his eyes glittering with triumph. "Smart girl." Carter stared at me, disbelief etched into his features. "Juliet, you can't trust him." "I know," I said softly, my chest tight with guilt. "But this is the only way." Adrian stepped back, tucking the file under his arm. "You've made the right decision, Juliet. I'll make sure you don't regret it." As he turned to leave the room, my heart sank. I had just made a deal with the devil. And the worst part? I wasn't sure if I'd ever be able to walk away from it. Chapter 6. A Broken Alliance. The silence in the room stretched, thick with the weight of what I had done. Carter's eyes, filled with hurt and disbelief, bore into me as Adrian exited, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. I couldn't bring myself to look at Carter. Not yet. The gravity of my decision pressed down on my chest like an anchor, making it impossible to breathe. "You've made a mistake, Juliet." Carter's voice was low, raw with emotion. "He'll never let you walk away. You handed him exactly what he wanted." I clenched my fists at my sides, my fingernails digging into my palms. I knew Carter was right, but in that moment, I couldn't see any other way out. Adrian had the power to destroy everything I loved, and I wasn't willing to let him, no matter what it cost me. "I did what I had to," I said quietly, my voice barely audible. Carter shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "What you had to, or what he made you believe you had to." My throat tightened, and I swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. I had made my choice. It was too late to take it back. "He would have ruined my family, Carter. Do you think I wanted to give in to him? Do you think this was easy for me?" "I don't know what to think anymore, Juliet," he said, his voice hardening. "But I do know one thing. You've just handed Adrian even more control over your life." I turned to face him, anger flaring in my chest. "And what was your plan, huh? To take him down with a few pieces of paper? He's smarter than that, Carter." "He was always going to win." Carter stared at me, his jaw clenched, the muscle in his cheek twitching. "We could have fought. Together." I flinched at the word. Together. Once, that had been our promise. But now, standing in the wreckage of our failed plan, it felt hollow. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice thick with regret. "I thought I was doing the right thing." Carter's gaze softened. The pain in his eyes didn't fade. "Maybe you thought you were protecting your family, but what about us? What about everything we've been fighting for?" I had no answer to that. Not one that would make any of this better. Carter sighed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I should have known this would happen," he muttered under his breath. Adrian always gets what he wants. The mention of Adrian's name sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. His smug smile flashed in my mind, and the way his fingers had brushed my skin like he already owned me. I had played right into his hands, and I hated myself for it. "I have to go," Carter said suddenly, breaking the tense silence. "Go? Where?" I asked, startled by his abruptness. "I don't know," he muttered, grabbing his jacket. Anywhere but here. I need time to think, to figure out where we go from here. Panic bubbled up in my chest. Carter, please. He held up a hand, cutting me off. Don't. Just don't. I need space, Juliet. I can't be around you right now. Not after this. I watched helplessly as he stormed out of the room, the sound of the door slamming behind him reverberating in my ears. The finality of it hit me like a punch to the gut, and I sank onto the edge of the sofa, my body trembling. I had lost him. I had lost everything. For a long time, I just sat there, staring blankly at the door. The room felt colder without Carter in it, the shadows stretching across the walls as the evening light faded. I was alone now, truly alone, and Adrian had won. The thought sent a chill down my spine. This was only the beginning. Adrian would come for me again. Of that I had no doubt. He wouldn't be satisfied with just the file. He wanted more. He always did. But I wasn't going to let him break me. I stood up, my legs shaky but resolute. Adrian had backed me into a corner. That didn't mean I had to stay there. I still had choices. Maybe not many, and maybe not good ones. But they were mine. I wouldn't let him control me any more than he already had. As I made my way toward the door, a plan began to form in my mind. It was reckless, dangerous, and probably foolish. It was all I had left. I couldn't trust anyone, not even Carter right now. But I could trust myself. Adrian thought he had me trapped, but he had underestimated one thing: my determination. I wasn't the same naive girl he had tried to manipulate. I was stronger than that. And if he thought he could keep me under his thumb, he was in for a surprise. I would play his game for now, but I was already thinking of ways to rewrite the rules. Because in my story, Juliet doesn't just survive, she wins. Chapter 7. The Return. Days blurred into weeks, and I didn't hear from Carter. Each passing day felt like an eternity as I carried the weight of my decision, wondering if I had lost him forever. Adrian had kept his distance too, which only heightened my anxiety. I knew it was only a matter of time before he made his next move, before he'd come to collect what he believed was his. But I had been preparing for him. I wasn't going to sit idly by and wait for Adrian Blackwood to tighten his grip on my life. I would strike first. I had been quietly gathering information, trying to understand more about Adrian's empire, his connections, his weaknesses. But with each piece of the puzzle I uncovered, I realized just how deep his roots went, how powerful he really was. Still, I wasn't going to let him break me. I had just returned from a meeting with one of my father's business associates when I found an envelope waiting for me on my doorstep. There was no name, no return address, just a small black envelope with a red wax seal stamped with the letter C. Carter. I tore it open, my pulse quickening as I unfolded the short note inside. Meet me at our place. Midnight. That was it. No explanation, no pleasantries, just a command. My heart raced as I glanced at the clock. Midnight was only a few hours away. It had been so long since I'd heard from him, and now he wanted to meet in secret. Something must have changed. I was nervous, but I didn't hesitate. I had to see him, had to know if he still believed in what we were fighting for, or if he had given up on me altogether. The park was deserted when I arrived, the soft glow of the street lamps casting long shadows across the cobblestone paths. It was quiet, save for the rustling of leaves in the night breeze. Our place, a small clearing near the old fountain, felt strangely empty without Carter already there. I checked my phone. 5 minutes to midnight. I was about to text him when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, expecting to see Carter, but instead, my breath caught in my throat. Adrian. He stood a few feet away, dressed in his usual tailored black suit, his hands casually tucked into his pockets. His eyes gleamed in the low light, that same predatory look I had come to despise. Expecting someone else? He asked, his voice smooth and deceptively calm. My heart sank. What are you doing here, Adrian? He took a step closer, his gaze never leaving mine. I could ask you the same question, Juliet. This place is a little out of the way for a midnight stroll, don't you think? I clenched my fists at my sides, trying to hide the panic rising in my chest. He couldn't have known about Carter. I don't owe you an explanation. His smile was cold, calculating. Oh, but you do. You owe me more than you realize. He stepped even closer, his presence suffocating, and I had to force myself to hold my ground. You've been playing a dangerous game, Juliet, and I think it's time you realize just how high the stakes really are. I'm not afraid of you, I said, though my voice betrayed the fear gnawing at my insides. Adrian chuckled, the sound low and sinister. No, you should be. Before I could respond, I heard another set of footsteps approaching, this time faster, more urgent. I turned, and there he was. Carter. His eyes locked onto Adrian first, a flash of anger crossing his face before his gaze shifted to me. He looked tense, on edge, as though he had been expecting the worst. Juliet, he said, his voice breathless. Are you okay? Adrian stepped back, the smirk never leaving his face. Look who decided to join us. I was wondering when you'd show up, Carter. Carter's jaw tightened. Leave her out of this, Adrian. This has nothing to do with her. Oh, but it has everything to do with her, Adrian said, his voice dripping with arrogance. Juliet is the key to everything, and you know it. I glanced between the two of them, my mind racing to keep up. What was really going on here? Had Carter known Adrian would be here all along? What are you talking about? I demanded, my frustration bubbling over. What is this? Carter hesitated, but before he could answer, Adrian spoke up. Carter and I go way back, he said, his tone almost conversational. We've been at odds for a long time, but we've always known how to play the game. Until now. What do you mean? I asked, my heart sinking. Adrian's gaze flicked to Carter. Why don't you tell her, Carter? Tell her about our little arrangement. Carter's expression darkened. Don't listen to him, Juliet. He's trying to twist the truth. Is that so? Adrian's smile widened, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Then tell her what you've been hiding. I turned to Carter, confusion and betrayal warring in my chest. What is he talking about? Carter's face was tight with tension, but he didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a step toward me, his voice soft but urgent. Juliet, I was trying to protect you. Everything I've done, everything I did for you, for me. My voice shook. What are you hiding, Carter? Adrian crossed his arms, watching us with that same smug look. Go on, Carter. Tell her how you've been working with me all along. Tell her how you plan to use her just like I did. The world tilted beneath my feet as the weight of Adrian's words crashed over me. My breath caught in my throat, and I took a step back, shaking my head. No, that can't be true. Carter reached for me, desperation in his eyes. Juliet, listen to me. Don't touch me! I jerked away from him, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. You lied to me. No, it wasn't like that, Carter said, his voice pleading. I was trying to get close to Adrian, to find a way to stop him. You thought you could manipulate me? I spat, anger and betrayal choking me. You were just like him the whole time. Juliet, please, Carter's voice cracked. I never meant to hurt you, but it was too late. Everything I thought I knew, about Adrian, about Carter, about this twisted game, was crumbling around me. I had trusted Carter, believed in him, and now I didn't know who to trust. Game over, Juliet, Adrian said softly, his voice echoing in the silence of the night. You've lost. I turned, my mind racing, my heart breaking. I wasn't sure who I was angrier with, Carter for betraying me or myself for letting it happen. But one thing was certain. The game wasn't over. Not yet. Chapter 8. A Cold Reckoning. I stood there, numb, watching Carter's eyes as they pleaded with me. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that the man I thought was my ally, my friend, maybe even more, wasn't capable of manipulating me. But after Adrian's words, the doubts I had been trying to suppress crashed over me like a tidal wave. Juliet, listen, Carter began, taking another step closer. You don't understand. This was never about hurting you. I shook my head, backing away from both him and Adrian. You think that makes it better? You were working with him, Carter? You were playing me this whole time. Adrian stood back, arms crossed, his expression smug as he watched the chaos unfold. He had won this round, and he was enjoying every second of it. I wasn't playing you, Carter insisted, his voice full of desperation. I was trying to protect you from him. Everything I did was to get close to Adrian to find out his plans. And what? I snapped, my anger bubbling to the surface. You thought lying to me, deceiving me, would somehow help? You thought that once I found out the truth, I'd just forgive you. Carter's face crumpled with guilt, but he didn't back down. I never wanted you to find out like this. I was trying to keep you safe. Safe. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the quiet night. You have no idea what you've done. I turned away from him, unable to bear the sight of his face, the face I had started to trust. My chest ached with betrayal, but behind the anger, there was something else. A hollow, gnawing pain that came with the realization that, once again, I was caught in someone else's game. Adrian's voice cut through the night, cold and sharp. Well, this has been a lovely little drama, but I think it's time to wrap things up, don't you? I stiffened, turning to face him. Adrian's eyes gleamed with satisfaction, but beneath that I could see something darker. He hadn't just come here to gloat. He had come to make sure I knew just how deep his control over my life went. You've made your point, I said, my voice steady even though my heart was racing. But if you think I'm going to just roll over and let you win, you're wrong. Adrian raised an eyebrow, his smile fading. I don't think you quite understand the situation, Juliet. You don't have a choice. Not anymore. His words sent a chill down my spine, but I refused to show him how much they affected me. You think you control everything, don't you? But you don't control me. Adrian's gaze hardened. Don't I? He stepped forward, closing the distance between us, his presence looming over me. You're in over your head, Juliet. This isn't a game you can win. I gave you a chance, multiple chances, to walk away, to join me. But now you've left me no choice. I swallowed hard, refusing to let him see the fear coursing through me. And what's that supposed to mean? Adrian's smile returned, colder this time. It means that from this moment on, you're mine. Your family, your legacy, everything you care about is mine. And there's nothing you or Carter can do to stop it. I glanced at Carter, who stood frozen, his fists clenched at his sides. I could see the frustration and anger in his eyes, but I could also see the helplessness. He had tried to protect me, but now we were both at Adrian's mercy. I turned back to Adrian, my heart pounding in my chest. You don't own me. You never will. Adrian's smile faltered for a moment, but then his expression shifted, amused, almost intrigued. We'll see about that. He took a step back, his gaze lingering on me for a moment before turning to Carter. You should have known better, Carter. You can't outplay me. Carter's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Adrian had already won this round, and we both knew it. Without another word, Adrian turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing as the reality of what had just happened settled over me like a suffocating blanket. Carter approached me cautiously, his voice low. Juliet! Don't, I whispered, my voice barely audible. He stopped, his expression full of guilt and regret. I'm sorry. I should have told you the truth. I swallowed the lump in my throat, my eyes stinging with tears I refused to let fall. It's too late for that. Carter sighed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. I was trying to protect you. I thought I could. Protect me, I interrupted, my voice rising. You've done nothing but hurt me, Carter. You and Adrian both. I know, he said, his voice cracking. And I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if I have to. But right now, we need to figure out what our next move is. Our next move. I laughed bitterly. There's no our, Carter. Not anymore. He flinched, the words hitting him harder than I expected. I didn't care. I was done trusting people who only saw me as a pawn in their games. I was done letting people control my life. I turned away from him, my mind spinning with everything that had happened. Adrian thought he had won, that he had underestimated me. I wasn't just going to walk away from this. I wasn't going to let him take everything from me. I would find a way to beat him. I glanced back at Carter, my voice cold and distant. You should leave. Carter hesitated, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and desperation, but he nodded. If that's what you want. It is, I said firmly. Without another word, Carter turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows just as Adrian had. I stood there alone, the weight of the night pressing down on me, but I wasn't broken. Not yet. I would find a way to take back control, to take back my life, because in this game, the only person I could trust was myself, and I wasn't done fighting. Chapter 9. Shattered Plans. The days that followed felt like walking through a fog, thick, suffocating, and endless. Each morning, I woke up hoping that it had all been a nightmare, that the betrayal, the lies, and the suffocating weight of Adrian's control over my life weren't real. But each day, reality sank in a little deeper. Adrian was still out there waiting for me to make the wrong move. Carter was gone, his betrayal cutting deeper than I wanted to admit. I had been a fool to trust either of them. It wasn't long before I started feeling the pressure of Adrian's power. My father began making cryptic remarks about changes in the company. Nothing serious, just business moves that didn't sit right with me. It was subtle at first, but I knew Adrian was behind it. He was tightening his grip on my family, my future, and I couldn't just sit back and let it happen. One evening, after another tense dinner with my parents, I decided I needed answers. I couldn't keep living in the dark, waiting for Adrian to strike again. I needed to know what he was planning, what he wanted from me, and how far he was willing to go to get it. I needed to confront him. It was late when I arrived at Adrian's penthouse. The building loomed over the city, a symbol of wealth and power that felt like a punch to the gut every time I looked at it. I had never been here before, but I knew enough about Adrian's world to know that this was his domain. A place where he called the shots, where every move was calculated, and where I was just another piece in his game. I hesitated at the entrance, my heart pounding in my chest. Part of me wanted to turn back, to run as far away from this world as possible, but I knew I couldn't. If I wanted to take control of my life, I had to face Adrian head-on. I took a deep breath and pressed the intercom. A moment later, the door buzzed open, and I stepped inside. The elevator ride felt like an eternity, the silence in the small space amplifying the pounding of my heart. When the doors finally slid open, I was greeted by a sprawling penthouse, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city skyline. Everything about this place screamed luxury. Marble floors, sleek furniture, and art that probably cost more than most people's homes. And there, standing by the windows, was Adrian. He didn't turn when I entered, but I knew he had heard me. His silhouette was sharp against the backdrop of the city lights, his posture relaxed, as if he had been expecting me all along. "Juliet," he said softly, his voice carrying through the spacious room. "I didn't think you'd come." I took a step forward, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "You didn't leave me much of a choice." Adrian finally turned to face me, his piercing blue eyes locking onto mine. "But I have to admit, I'm impressed. I thought you'd run." "I'm not running," I said, my voice steady even though my heart was racing. "I'm here because I need answers." He raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a faint smile. "Answers? About what?" "About why you're doing this," I said, taking another step closer. "Why you're going after my family, my company, my life." "What do you want from me, Adrian?" Adrian's smile faded, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something dark in his eyes. "What do I want from you, Juliet?" "Everything. Your company, your family's influence. It's all a part of the game." "Game," I repeated, my anger rising. "This isn't a game, Adrian. This is my life." He sighed, walking over to the sleek bar in the corner of the room. He poured himself a drink, his movements calm and deliberate. "You're right, of course. It's not a game to you. To me, it's always been a game. A very dangerous one. I watched him closely, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of his words. Why me? I asked, my voice quieter now. Why did you choose me? Adrian paused, his glass halfway to his lips. He didn't answer right away, and for the first time I saw a hint of hesitation in his expression. You're more than just a pawn, Juliet, he said finally, his voice low. You are the key to everything. What does that even mean? I demanded, frustration bubbling to the surface. You've been pulling the strings from the beginning. You've lied? Manipulated? I never lied to you, Adrian cut in, his voice sharp. I may have manipulated the situation, yes, but I never lied. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. Then what do you really want, Adrian? What is all of this for? He took a sip of his drink, his gaze never leaving mine. Power, control, everything I was taught to want. But with you, his voice trailed off, and he turned away, as if the next words were difficult to say. With you, it's different. I blinked, taken aback by his sudden shift. Different. How? Adrian set his glass down, his hands gripping the edge of the bar. I've spent my entire life building an empire, doing whatever it took to stay on top. But you've made me question everything. I stared at him, my heart pounding. What are you saying? He turned to face me again, his expression hard but vulnerable in a way I had never seen before. I'm saying that you were never just a piece in my game. You're more than that, Juliet. I wanted you to be mine, not because of what your family could give me, but because of what you are. The room felt smaller, the air thicker as his words hung between us. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The Adrian I knew was ruthless, calculating. A man who'd do anything to get what he wanted. But now, standing in front of me, he was admitting to something I hadn't expected. Something that terrified me more than anything else. You're lying, I whispered, shaking my head. This is just another one of your manipulations. Adrian took a step closer, his eyes locked on mine. I'm not lying, Juliet. Not this time. My breath caught in my throat as I looked up at him, my mind racing. Was this the truth? Or was it just another part of his twisted game? I wanted to believe him. That I couldn't forget everything he had done, everything he had taken from me. Trusting him now would be a mistake. One I couldn't afford to make. I don't believe you, I said, my voice shaking. Adrian's expression darkened, and he took another step toward me. You don't have to believe me. But you will. I backed away, my heart racing. What are you talking about? I'm giving you a choice, Juliet, he said softly. You can walk away right now, and I won't stop you. But if you stay, I'll show you that I'm not the monster you think I am. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at him, torn between fear and the strange pull I had always felt toward him. This was my chance to walk away, to leave this world of manipulation and deceit behind. But something kept me rooted to the spot, my feet refusing to move. Adrian reached out, his fingers brushing against mine. Stay, he whispered, his voice low and full of promise. And let me show you the truth. I looked up at him, my mind swirling with doubts and fears. But against all logic, I found myself nodding. And just like that, I was back in the game. Chapter 10. The Fragile Alliance. Adrian's eyes darkened as he held my gaze, the weight of his unspoken promises hanging in the air between us. Part of me wanted to turn and run, to escape the suffocating tension and the danger that lingered in his presence. But another part, a part that was more reckless than I cared to admit, was curious about what lay beyond the walls he had built around himself. All right, I said, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions crashing within me. I'll stay, but only on my terms. A flicker of surprise crossed Adrian's face, quickly replaced by a cool, calculating expression. Very well. But let's not kid ourselves. You and I both know that this isn't a game of checkers. It's chess, and I'm the one making moves. Then I'll be ready, I replied, crossing my arms defiantly. But remember, I'm not just some piece on your board. I have my own strategies. Adrian stepped back, allowing me space while his lips curled into a slight smile, as if amused by my bravado. I wouldn't have it any other way, Juliet. The atmosphere shifted, tension still palpable but tinged with something new. An unspoken understanding, perhaps a fragile alliance formed in the face of mutual interests, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I was walking into a trap of my own making. Now, Adrian said, his tone growing serious, if we're going to do this, we need to be transparent about our goals. I want your family's influence, and I want you, for my own sake or for your plans, I interrupted, my voice laced with suspicion. He studied me for a moment, playful demeanor gone. I'll admit, both. But understand, Juliet, my family has been at war with yours for years. This is more than a personal vendetta. It's about power, about control. Why do you want me in this? I asked, narrowing my eyes. What do you gain from it? He took a step closer again, his expression intense. Because you challenge me. You make me question my own motives. You're not afraid to stand up to me. That intrigues me more than I care to admit. I held his gaze, searching for any sign of deception, but all I saw was the truth. The truth that scared me the most. Adrian was dangerous. There was something more complex lurking beneath the surface. And I was standing on the precipice, unsure if I was ready to leap. So what now? I asked, breaking silence. Now we start with what you know, he replied, crossing his arms as he leaned against the bar. You've been gathering information, haven't you? Tell me what you've found out about my plans. I hesitated, weighing my options. Sharing my findings could be seen as a sign of trust, but it could also leave me vulnerable. Adrian had already shown me how easily he could manipulate the truth, and I didn't want to give him any advantage. I've been watching, I finally said, my voice measured. I know you're positioning yourself to take control of key contracts that my father has been working on. You're trying to destabilize our influence in the market. He nodded, his gaze unwavering. And you've been doing your homework? I appreciate the initiative, but you need to understand. There's a bigger picture at play. I can't let you and your family interfere with my plans. I pushed back, my anger flaring. And I can't let you ruin everything my father has worked for. So what's the solution, Adrian? Right now, we need to operate in a way that benefits us both, he said, his tone pragmatic. Our families are intertwined in ways that we can't ignore. If we can find a way to consolidate our power instead of fighting each other, we could both emerge stronger. I shook my head. You're asking me to betray my family, Adrian. To side with you against everything I've been taught to protect. Am I? He asked, tilting his head. Or am I giving you a chance to rewrite the narrative? To reclaim your future instead of letting others dictate it? I considered his words carefully. There was truth in what he said, but there was also danger. Adrian was a master manipulator, and I had to be careful not to get swept up in his schemes. But could I truly ignore the opportunity he was presenting? Fine, I said, my voice steady despite the uncertainty gnawing at me. But I need to know everything. No more secrets, Adrian. If we're going to do this, we do it together. His lips curled into a satisfied smile, and I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and trepidation. I was stepping into a world I barely understood, a world where trust was as fragile as glass. I can agree to that, he replied, extending a hand. A partnership, then. For now, at least. I stared at his outstretched hand, the gesture feeling monumental. I took a deep breath, my heart racing as I placed my palm against his. The moment our hands touched, a jolt of electricity shot through me, and I quickly pulled back, my pulse quickening. It was a reminder of how intertwined our fates had become, a reminder that this fragile alliance could easily crumble under the weight of our conflicting loyalties. We need to be careful, I said, my voice firm. I won't hesitate to walk away if I feel you're manipulating me again. Understood, Adrian replied, his gaze steady. But if we're going to succeed, we have to be on the same side, no matter the cost. As I stood there, my heart pounding, I felt the gravity of my decision settle over me. I was stepping into the unknown, placing my trust in a man who thrived on manipulation. But for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope, Maybe, just maybe, I could turn the tables in this dangerous game. Together, we might just find a way to take control of our futures, but I knew I had to keep my guard up. This was a delicate dance, and one wrong step could send everything crashing down around us. I was ready to fight, ready to reclaim my life. But first, I needed to figure out just how far I was willing to go to protect everything I cared about. And that meant learning to navigate the treacherous waters of our alliance. With Adrian by my side. Or was it against me? The stakes had never been higher. Chapter 11. Unlikely Allies. The days that followed felt surreal. Adrian and I had established a tenuous partnership, but every interaction was laced with tension and uncertainty. I spent hours poring over documents, digging into every aspect of our family's businesses, looking for leverage and weak point. The stakes were high, and I needed to stay one step ahead of Adrian while also proving my worth as a partner. The sun was setting on another long day when Adrian summoned me to his penthouse. I arrived, the elevator ride feeling heavier than usual, the air thick with anticipation. As the doors opened, I was greeted by the familiar sight of the sprawling living area, but this time, it felt different. The atmosphere was charged, electric, as if something significant was about to unfold. Adrian stood by the bar pouring himself a drink. He looked up as I entered, his expression inscrutable. "You're on time," he remarked, a hint of surprise in his voice. "Don't act so shocked," I replied, trying to keep my tone light despite the anxiety churning in my stomach. "I'm not here to waste time." "Good," he said, setting the drink down and turning to face me. "Because we need to talk strategy." "Let's get to it then," I said, crossing my arms. He gestured toward a large whiteboard set up in the corner of the room, covered in notes and charts that detailed our family connections and business dealings. "I've been working on this," he said, stepping closer to the board. "We need to understand the intricacies of both our families' businesses. It's more complicated than I initially thought." I approached the board, studying the connections he had drawn. "You've put a lot of work into this," I admitted, impressed despite myself. "What's your end goal?" Adrian paused, his expression serious. "To unite our families under a single banner. If we can present ourselves as a cohesive force, we can outmaneuver anyone who threatens our power. But we need to be strategic about it." I nodded, the gravity of his words sinking in. "And how do you suggest we do that?" "We need to find common ground. There are areas where our businesses overlap. We can leverage those connections to gain influence," he explained, his voice steady. "But it won't be easy. Your father won't agree to anything without a fight." "Neither will yours," I countered, my thoughts racing. "If we're going to convince them, we need a solid plan." Adrian leaned back against the bar, his gaze piercing as he studied me. "That's why I need your help. You know your family better than I do." I took a moment to gather my thoughts, piecing together a plan. My father respects power. He values strategic alliances. If we can show him that our collaboration is mutually beneficial, it might work. We need to present it as a way to strengthen both families. Adrian nodded, the corners of his mouth turning up slightly. "Exactly. But we'll need more than just talk. We'll need to demonstrate our commitment to this partnership, through actions, not just words." "Actions?" I asked, intrigued. He stepped closer, his eyes intense. "We need to find a way to take out a common enemy, someone who poses a threat to both our families. If we can neutralize that threat together, it will prove to both our fathers that this alliance is worth pursuing." "Who do you have in mind?" I asked, a mix of curiosity and wariness bubbling within me. Adrian crossed his arms, his expression thoughtful. "There's a rival firm that's been gaining traction. They've been poaching key clients from both our families. If we can work together to undermine them, it will send a strong message." I frowned, considering the implications. "And how do you propose we do that? We can't just attack them outright." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We gather intelligence, find out what they're planning, and exploit their weaknesses. You know how to navigate this world, Juliet. You've been trained for this." I felt a rush of adrenaline. The thrill of strategizing, of taking control, was intoxicating. All right, I'm in, but I need to know everything you have on this rival firm. Adrian smiled, the intensity of his gaze making my heart race. I liked that fire in you. As we delved into the details, I felt a strange sense of camaraderie developing between us. Partnership forged out of necessity rather than trust. It was a delicate balance, one that could tip either way depending on how we played our cards. After hours of planning, I finally stood up, stretching as the weight of the evening settled over me. I should get going. We have a lot of work ahead of us. Agreed, Adrian replied, his voice softer now. But remember, this isn't just business. We need to be prepared for the fallout. The moment our families realize we're working together, there will be consequences. I nodded, feeling the gravity of his words. I understand. As I turned to leave, I felt his gaze on me, a mixture of intensity and something else I couldn't quite place. Juliet, he called after me, his voice low. I paused, glancing back. Yes? If this works, if we manage to unite our families, it could change everything. For both of us. Chapter 12. The Edge of Control. Or it could blow up in our faces, I replied, the caution in my voice palpable. Every step we took felt like we were treading on dangerous ground, and the weight of our plans, or the risks we were taking, hung between us like a storm cloud ready to burst. True, Adrian said, his voice low, that familiar edge of challenge curling in his tone. But that's the risk we take. His words ignited something inside me, a spark of defiance, of determination. I smiled, the flicker of adrenaline mixed with something else, something deeper, more dangerous. Then let's make sure it's worth the risk. I turned toward the door, my head still swimming with thoughts of strategy and uncertainty. But just as I stepped into the hallway, the cool night air brushing against my skin, I felt his hand on my arm, firm but gentle, pulling me back. Juliet. His voice was soft but commanding, and when I turned to face him, the look in his eyes stole the breath from my lungs. The space between us, already thin, seemed to vanish in that moment. His hand, still holding my arm, slid up to my shoulder, the warmth of his touch sending a shiver down my spine. I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening as our eyes met. There was something raw, something magnetic in the way he was looking at me, and before I could even process what was happening, he closed the gap between us. His lips were on mine, firm, demanding, and I melted into him, my thoughts scattering like leaves in the wind. The fire that had been simmering between us for weeks, the tension that had built with every stolen glance, every charged conversation, finally ignited. I felt his hands move to my waist, pulling me closer, and I responded instinctively, my body pressing against his. Every inch of me was alive with sensation, the heat of his touch, the way his breath mingled with mine as we deepened the kiss, and the sheer force of the connection between us. I wrapped my arms around his neck, letting myself fall into him, my mind clouded with desire. His lips moved against mine with a hunger that matched my own, and for a moment, nothing else existed. No plans, no strategies, no risks, just the two of us. His hand slid up my back, and I arched into him, a soft gasp escaping my lips as he pressed me against the wall, his body firm and unyielding. I felt his fingers tangle in my hair, tilting my head back as he kissed me harder, deeper, and my breath hitched, my pulse thundering in my ears. I wanted this. Wanted him. But somewhere in the haze of desire, a voice whispered caution. The edge of control we were standing on was razor thin, and I knew if we took one more step, there'd be no going back. Adrian's lips moved to my neck, and I gasped as I felt the heat of his breath against my skin, his hands roaming my body with an urgency that matched the fire blazing inside me. Every touch, every kiss, sent sparks of electricity through me, making it harder to think, harder to remember why I had to stop this. His hand slid under my shirt, his fingers brushing the bare skin of my waist, and I shivered under his touch, a soft moan escaping my lips. My body ached for more, for the connection that had been building between us, but the voice in the back of my mind grew louder. Adrian, I whispered, my breath coming in ragged gasps. He pulled back slightly, his eyes dark with desire, his breath just as labored as mine. Juliet. His voice was rough, his gaze searching mine, as if asking if we should keep going, if I wanted this as much as he did. And God, I did. But the risks, the stakes, were too high. Not just in the world of power and strategy we had entangled ourselves in, but here, in this moment. If we crossed this line, it would change everything, and I wasn't ready for what that might mean. I pressed my hands against his chest, gently but firmly pushing him back, my heart racing as I tried to catch my breath. We can't, I whispered, my voice trembling with the effort it took to stop. Adrian's brow furrowed, his breath still heavy as he searched my face. Juliet, I know, I interrupted, closing my eyes for a moment as I tried to steady myself. But if we let this go any further... I opened my eyes and met his gaze, my heart aching with how much I wanted him. We'll lose control. For a moment, neither of us moved, the weight of my words hanging in the air between us. His hand stayed on my waist, his touch still warm, still tempting, and I could see the struggle in his eyes, the same conflict I was feeling. Finally, he nodded, stepping back, though his gaze never left mine. You're right, he said, his voice low, but there was a rawness to it, a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. I nodded, taking a deep breath as I tried to calm the storm raging inside me. The fire between us hadn't died. It was still burning, still simmering just beneath the surface. But for now, we had to pull back. Adrian reached up, gently brushing a strand of hair from my face, and a simple gesture sent a fresh wave of warmth through me. This doesn't change anything, he said softly, his eyes holding mine. I still want this. I still want you. I swallowed hard, my throat tight as I nodded. I know, but we need to be smart. He smiled, that familiar flicker of challenge returning to his eyes. Since when are we smart about anything? A laugh bubbled up in my chest, easing some of the tension between us. Good point. Adrian leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to my forehead, and I closed my eyes, letting myself savor the warmth of his lips on my skin. We'll wait, he murmured. But it's not over. I opened my eyes, meeting his intense gaze, and felt the truth of his words settle deep inside me. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for now, we had to keep our heads, stay focused on the bigger picture. For now, the fire would have to wait. The days blurred into a whirlwind of strategy meetings, late-night planning sessions, and covert operations. Adrian and I fell into a rhythm, working together seamlessly as we navigated the treacherous waters of our family's legacies. The tension between us simmered just below the surface, a mix of rivalry, distrust, and a strange, unacknowledged bond forming as we uncovered secrets that would shake the very foundations of our families. Adrian had been surprisingly insightful, showing me the intricacies of his world. I had been exposed to the brutal nature of corporate warfare, but I was also learning how to fight back. We had set our sights on a rival firm, Sterling Enterprises, which had been encroaching on both our territories. Every night, we pored over financial documents, client lists, and contracts, searching for vulnerabilities. Each discovery brought us closer, and I felt the walls I had built around my heart begin to crack. Adrian was not the monster I had imagined. He was a man driven by ambition and desire, a man who had his own reasons for wanting to bring down Sterling Enterprises. Look at this, Adrian said one evening, pointing to a chart on the board. They've recently lost a major client, which means they're more vulnerable than ever. We can capitalize on that. I leaned in closer, my heart racing as I absorbed the information. If we can get one of their remaining clients to switch to us, it will send a clear message. Adrian nodded, his gaze flickering to me. We need to act quickly. I have a contact who might be able to help us infiltrate their ranks. Infiltrate? I raised an eyebrow. What do you have in mind? I want you to meet with my friend Jackson. He's got connections and knows the inner workings of Sterling. He can help us gather intel on their operations and any weaknesses we can exploit. Jackson? I frowned, feeling a sense of unease. I don't know him. What if he can't be trusted? Adrian's expression turned serious. He's reliable. He understands the stakes, and he has his own reasons for wanting to take Sterling down. You'll be safe with him, I promise. I hesitated, still wary of placing my trust in anyone else. But I knew we couldn't do this alone. If Adrian believed Jackson could help, then perhaps it was worth the risk. Fine, I said, my voice steadied. Set up the meeting. But I'll handle this on my own. Adrian smirked, a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. You've got a lot of fire in you, Juliet. I like that. I rolled my eyes, trying to mask the flutter of nerves in my stomach. Just remember who's in control here. The next day, I found myself in a dimly lit cafe on the outskirts of the city, waiting for Jackson. My heart raced with anticipation and apprehension. Adrian had given me a brief rundown of who Jackson was, a former employee of Sterling Enterprises who had been let go under dubious circumstances. He had a grudge, and that made him an asset. As I sipped my coffee, I scanned the cafe, trying to spot the man I had never met. The bell above the door jingled, and a tall, rugged figure entered. Jackson was just as Adrian had described. Ruggedly handsome with tattoos peeking out from under his sleeves, a magnetic presence that drew attention without effort. He scanned the room before his gaze landed on me. I waved him over, feeling a mix of excitement and caution. Juliet, he said as he approached, a slight grin on his face. Nice to finally meet you. Thanks for coming, I replied, gesturing for him to take a seat. Adrian spoke highly of you. Did he? Jackson chuckled, settling into the chair across from me. Hope he didn't scare you away. I smiled, trying to put him at ease. Not yet. He leaned back, crossing his arms, his eyes narrowing slightly. So what's the plan? I took a deep breath, diving straight into the details. We need information on Sterling. Any weaknesses, vulnerabilities, anything we can exploit. Adrian believes you can help us gather intel. Jackson's expression turned serious. You're aiming for something big. What's in it for you? I hesitated, weighing my words carefully. Power. Control. I want to protect my family's legacy. He nodded, his gaze piercing as if he were sizing me up. And what about Adrian? What's his angle? Adrian and I are working together, I replied, my voice firm. This isn't just about him. He wants to take down Sterling, too. Our families have been at odds for years, and this is our chance to gain the upper hand. Jackson raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. A partnership, huh? That's dangerous territory. Trust me, I know, I said, my voice steady. But we're both determined to see this through. The question is whether you're in or out. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. I have my own reasons for wanting to see Sterling fall. That you should know, I don't play nice. I smiled, feeling a flicker of hope. Neither do I. We spent the next hour discussing strategies and potential weaknesses within Sterling. Jackson proved to be resourceful, revealing connections and insights that would give us the advantage we needed. As we talked, I found myself warming to him, despite my initial reservations. Adrian trusts you, I said, a hint of surprise in my voice. Does he? Jackson asked, his expression playful. That's rare. He's a hard guy to read. Trust me, I know, I replied, my voice laced with frustration. But this is different. He believes in what we're trying to accomplish. Good, Jackson said, leaning back with a smirk. Then you might have a shot at pulling this off. As our conversation continued, I felt a sense of camaraderie building. Jackson was more than just a pawn. He was a player in this dangerous game, and having him on our side felt like a significant victory. Just as we finished discussing the logistics of our plan, I glanced at the clock. I had to get back. Adrian would be expecting me. Thank you for your time, Jackson, I said, standing up and reaching for my purse. This has been enlightening. He stood, a sly grin on his face. Just remember if you need anything. Information, backup, whatever. I'm your guy. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me. I will. I promise. As I walked out of the cafe, my mind raced with possibilities. With Jackson on our side and Adrian's cunning, we might finally have a chance to reclaim what was ours. But I also knew I had to remain vigilant. This partnership was still fragile, and the stakes had never been higher. With Adrian waiting for me back at the penthouse, I steeled myself for the next stage of our plan. The game was shifting, and I was determined to play my part, no matter the cost. Chapter 13. Price of Power. When I arrived back at Adrian's penthouse, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. The moment I stepped through the door, I found him pacing, his expression a mixture of focus and restlessness. "Juliet," he said, turning to face me, his eyes sharp. "Did you meet with Jackson?" "I did," I replied, keeping my tone even. "He's on board. We have a plan." "Good." Adrian's gaze intensified, and I could sense the wheels turning in his mind. "What did he say?" I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the nervous flutter in my stomach. "He's got intel on Sterling Enterprises. Weaknesses we can exploit. We need to move quickly if we want to take advantage of this." Adrian nodded, moving toward the whiteboard where our notes and plans were laid out. "Tell me everything." I stepped closer, detailing what Jackson and I had discussed. Adrian listened intently, jotting down notes and asking pointed questions. The more we talked, the more the tension in the room shifted. We were no longer adversaries but collaborators, each of us bringing our strengths to the table, working toward a common goal. As I outlined our strategy, I couldn't help but notice the way Adrian's expression changed, his intensity softening. There was something undeniably magnetic about him when he was focused, driven by ambition. "All right," he said, stepping back from the board once we finished. "We'll set our plan in motion by the end of the week." "Are you sure you want to move this fast?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "We need to ensure everything is in place first. Rushing could jeopardize everything." Adrian crossed his arms, his gaze steady. "I've waited long enough. We need to hit Sterling when they least expect it. The longer we wait, the more time they have to fortify their defenses." I nodded, sensing the urgency in his words. He was right. We had to act decisively. "Okay, then let's finalize our approach with Jackson. We need to make sure we have all the information we need before we make our move." "Agreed," Adrian said, the faintest hint of a smile gracing his lips. "I knew you had the fire in you." "Don't get used to it," I replied, trying to keep my tone light despite the seriousness of our situation. "This is a partnership, remember?" "Of course," he said, his expression turning serious again. "But just so we're clear, there's no room for error. If we get this wrong, the consequences will be severe. For both of us." I felt a chill run down my spine, the gravity of his words sinking in. "I understand." "Good," he replied. "Now I have something for you." He walked over to his desk, opening a drawer and pulling out a small, sleek device. He tossed it to me, and I caught it reflexively. "What is it?" "A tracker," he said, his voice low. "For your phone. I want to be able to reach you at all times." I raised an eyebrow, feeling a rush of discomfort. "You want to track me?" "It's for your safety," Adrian replied, his gaze unwavering. "With everything happening, I can't afford to lose you. You're too valuable to this plan." I hesitated, my instinct telling me to refuse, but I couldn't ignore the logic behind his request. This partnership was fraught with danger, and having an extra layer of security might be wise. "Fine," I said, tucking the device into my pocket. "But if I feel like this is overstepping, I will take it off." "Fair enough," he replied, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Just know that I'll be watching." I rolled my eyes, trying to brush off the flutter of unease in my stomach. "I'll be fine. I'm not a child, Adrian." He took a step closer, his expression serious again. "I know you're not, but I also know this world can be ruthless. You need to stay sharp." "Don't worry about me," I replied, meeting his gaze. "I can take care of myself." He paused, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of something softer in his eyes. Admiration, perhaps, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the familiar mask of ambition. "All right then," he said, stepping back. "Let's finalize our plan and set this into motion." The next few days were a blur of activity, as we worked tirelessly to gather information and solidify our strategy. I met with Jackson several times, and together, we compiled a detailed report on Sterling Enterprises, identifying key clients we could target to undermine their stability. As we delved deeper into our plan, I found myself drawn into Adrian's world more than I ever expected. He was ruthless, no doubt, but there was an undeniable charisma about him that kept me engaged. We shared late nights at the penthouse, strategizing and planning, and in those moments, I felt a connection that both thrilled and terrified me. But just as I began to feel a sense of camaraderie, I received a phone call that shattered my fragile sense of control. "Juliet, it's your father," the voice on the line said, a sense of urgency threading through his words. "We need to talk. It's important." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "What is it, Dad?" "There's been a change in the boardroom. I need you to come to the office now," he insisted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'll be there," I replied, my heart racing as I ended the call. As I drove to my father's office, my mind raced with possibilities. Had Adrian made a move? Had Sterling struck back? I could feel the weight of the world pressing down on me, and the uncertainty gnawed at my insides. When I arrived at the office, my father was waiting for me, pacing back and forth, his expression tight with worry. "Dad, what's going on?" I asked, stepping into his office. He stopped, turning to face me, his eyes grave. "Juliet, we have a serious problem. I just received word that Adrian is positioning himself to take control of a critical contract we've been working on for months." "What? How do you know?" I asked, my heart sinking. "He has connections in the city, and they've been monitoring our movements," he replied, his voice tense. "If he secures that contract, it could undermine everything we've built. We can't let that happen." Panic flooded through me, but I forced myself to remain calm. "I'll talk to Adrian. We can figure this out." "No," my father said, his expression fierce. "You stay away from him. This is a dangerous game, and I won't have you caught in the crossfire. We need to take action now." "But," I started, but he cut me off. "Juliet, I'm serious. We can't let him win. We have to strategize and hit him where it hurts. He thinks he can control us, but we'll show him he's wrong." My mind raced. I knew the stakes were high, but I couldn't shake the feeling that confronting Adrian without understanding his full plan could lead to disaster. "Dad, I have a plan," I said slowly, weighing my words carefully. "I've been working with Jackson and Adrian. We've been gathering intel on Sterling, and we were going to strike soon. If we can beat them to the punch, it might give us an advantage." My father's expression darkened. "You can't trust him, Juliet. He's using you." "Maybe," I replied, frustration creeping into my voice. "But if we don't act, we'll lose everything. We have to fight back." He ran a hand over his face, tension radiating from him. "I need time to think. You have to promise me you'll stay away from Adrian until I figure this out." "I can't do that," I insisted, my heart racing. "I need to confront him. I need to understand what he's planning. You're playing a dangerous game. You don't know what he's capable of. I won't risk your safety." I stood there, torn between loyalty to my father and my own instincts. I knew Adrian was dangerous, but I also knew that the only way to protect my family was to understand the full extent of his plans. "Dad, I have to do this," I said firmly, my resolve hardening. "I won't sit back and let him take everything from us. I won't let him win." My father's gaze softened for a moment, but the tension remained. "Just be careful, Juliet. I can't lose you to this." As I left the office, I felt the weight of his words pressing down on me. I was stepping into a world of shadows and secrets, where every decision could lead to danger. But I had made my choice. I was done being a pawn. I would reclaim my power, and I would confront Adrian head on. The game was far from over, and I was ready to fight for everything I cared about. Chapter 14. The Confrontation. I left my father's office with a determined heart and a mind racing with possibilities. I had made my choice, and there was no turning back now. I needed to confront Adrian and find out what he was truly planning, and I would do it on my own terms. As I drove toward his penthouse, the city lights blurred past me, each one a reminder of the stakes involved. I was stepping into the lion's den, and I had to be ready for whatever awaited me inside. When I arrived, it took a moment to steady my breath before I entered. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and I could feel the familiar energy crackling in the air as I stepped off the elevator. Adrian was waiting for me, his expression unreadable as I walked into the room. "Juliet," he said, his tone cool, but there was an undercurrent of something else. Curiosity, maybe, or anticipation. "Adrian," I replied, crossing my arms defiantly. "We need to talk." "About?" he asked, feigning nonchalance as he leaned against the bar. "About Sterling and what you're planning," I said, cutting straight to the point. "I just found out my father knows about your move against us, and he wants to hit back." His eyebrows lifted, a flicker of amusement dancing in his eyes. "So your father has finally decided to act? I'm impressed." "Don't play games with me, Adrian," I warned, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "This isn't just a game for either of us anymore. I need to know what your plans are." He stepped closer, a hint of challenge in his gaze. "Why do you care? You're part of my plan now. You should be focusing on how we can work together to neutralize our enemies." "I care because I won't let you destroy everything my family has worked for," I shot back, my heart racing. "If you think I'm going to stand idly by while you plot against my father, you're mistaken." Adrian's expression darkened, and for a moment I saw the true depth of his ambition. "This isn't about your father, Juliet. This is about power, our power, and if you want to succeed, you need to understand the bigger picture." "The bigger picture," I echoed, incredulous. "All I see is you trying to crush my family's legacy to satisfy your own desires." "Maybe," he admitted, his voice low. "But the world we live in is ruthless, Julia. You can't afford to be sentimental. You have to fight for what you want." I took a step back, shaken by the intensity of his words. "I refuse to become a part of your vengeance, Adrian. I'm not interested in this twisted power play." Adrian's eyes narrowed, and he stepped closer, his voice a low growl. "You're already in this, whether you like it or not. You made your choice when you decided to stay, and now you need to commit." I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, anger and confusion swirling inside me. "You think I'm going to follow you blindly? I'm not a pawn in your game." "Then what do you want?" Adrian challenged, crossing his arms, the intensity in his gaze daring me to make a choice. I could feel the heat between us, the tension that had been simmering for weeks, waiting to explode. My pulse raced, my body thrumming with an energy that demanded release. The weight of everything, our plans, our partnership, our unspoken desires, hung in the air, thick and suffocating. But in that moment, all I wanted was him. "I want to take control," I whispered, my voice low but fierce. And with that, I pushed him hard against the wall, my body pressing against his with a force that surprised even me. I heard his breath hitch, saw the flicker of surprise in his eyes. They quickly melted into something darker, something hungrier. Our eyes locked, and I felt the fire inside me ignite. I knew what I wanted, and I was about to take it, no matter what the cost. Without another word, I crashed my lips against his, the kiss raw, urgent, and filled with the heat we'd both been holding back. His arms wrapped around me instantly, pulling me even closer, his body responding to mine with an intensity that sent a surge of electricity through me. I tangled my fingers in his hair, tugging slightly as I deepened the kiss, pouring everything into it, my frustration, my desire, my need for control. Adrian groaned into my mouth, the sound sending a thrill down my spine as his hands roamed over my back, exploring every curve, every inch of me. But I wasn't ready to let him take over. Not yet. I pushed harder against him, pinning him to the wall as my lips moved hungrily against his. My hand slid down to his chest, feeling the firm muscles beneath his shirt, and I pressed my body against his in a way that left no space between us. The friction, the heat, it was intoxicating. Adrian's breath was ragged as I broke the kiss, trailing my lips down his jawline, his neck. I could feel his pulse pounding beneath my lips, feel the way his body reacted to every touch. He groaned again, his hands gripping my waist tightly as I took control, claiming him with a confidence I hadn't known I possessed. "Juliet," he gasped, his voice rough, filled with desire and need. But I didn't slow down. I wanted more. I needed more. I pulled back just enough to look into his eyes, my breath coming fast and heavy. His gaze was dark, filled with hunger, and I could see the war raging inside him. The desire to let me take control, and the equally strong urge to dominate me in return. Not yet, I thought, as I pressed my lips to his again, harder this time, demanding more from him. His hand slid down to my hips, pulling me even closer, and I felt the hardness of his body against mine, the evidence of his need, his desire, and it only fueled the fire inside me. My hands moved to the buttons of his shirt, and I tore it open with a quick, impatient motion. His bare chest was firm and hot under my fingertips, and I couldn't resist trailing my hands over his skin, feeling every muscle, every inch of him. He shuddered under my touch, his breath coming in ragged gasps as I took my time, savoring the power I had over him. But Adrian wasn't the type to stay passive for long. In one swift motion, he grabbed my hips and spun us around, pinning me against the wall with a force that sent a jolt of pleasure through me. His mouth crashed against mine again, this time with a raw, untamed hunger that matched my own. He wasn't holding back anymore. His hands were everywhere, on my waist, sliding up my back, gripping my thighs. The roughness of his touch only heightened the intensity, and I moaned against his lips, arching into him as his hands explored my body with an urgency that made my heart race. "You want control?" he growled against my lips, his voice thick with desire. "Then take it." I didn't need any more encouragement. I grabbed the back of his neck, pulling him into another deep, bruising kiss as I pushed him toward the bed. He stumbled slightly, his breath ragged as I shoved him down onto the mattress, straddling him without hesitation. For a moment, I just looked at him, his chest rising and falling rapidly, his eyes dark and filled with heat. The power surged through me again, and I reveled in it, feeling the control, the dominance. "You like this, don't you?" I whispered, my voice dripping with seduction as I leaned down, my lips brushing against his ear. "You like it when I'm in control," Adrian groaned, his hands gripping my hips tightly. "You have no idea," he growled, his voice thick with need. I smirked, feeling a thrill shoot through me as I leaned in to kiss him again, my hands roaming over his chest, his stomach feeling every inch of him beneath me. The heat between us was palpable, and I could feel the tension building, threatening to snap at any moment. His hands slid under my shirt, his fingers exploring the soft skin of my back, sending shivers of pleasure through me. I gasped as his hands roamed higher, teasing, driving me wild with need. But I wasn't ready to let him take control again. I leaned down, pressing my lips to his neck, his collarbone, savoring the way he shuddered beneath me. Every touch, every kiss was a claim, a reminder that I was the one in control, that I was the one driving him mad with desire. Adrian's breathing grew heavier, his hands gripping my hips as I moved against him, the friction between us almost unbearable. I could feel his desire, feel the way his body responded to mine, and it only made me want more. But just as I felt myself losing control, felt the intensity of the moment sweeping me away, I stopped. Adrian groaned, his hands tightening on my hips as I pulled back slightly, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "Juliet," he whispered, his voice filled with a mixture of frustration and need. I leaned down, pressing my lips to his ear, my breath hot against his skin. "Not yet," I whispered, my voice thick with desire. "We're not done playing." He shuddered beneath me, his breath coming fast as I slowly pulled away, leaving both of us gasping, breathless, the heat of the moment still lingering in the air. We lay there for a moment, the intensity of what had just happened hanging between us, both of us struggling to catch our breath. Finally, Adrian chuckled, his voice low and hoarse. "You're going to drive me insane." I smiled, feeling the heat still coursing through me as I looked down at him, his chest rising and falling rapidly. "That's the plan." We both knew that this was only the beginning. The tension, the desire, the fire between us. It wasn't going away anytime soon. But for now, we lay together, breathless, tangled in each other's arms, knowing that the next time, neither of us would be able to hold back. The game we were playing was dangerous, but it was a game we both wanted to win. That night, I tossed and turned, the weight of my decision pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. Adrian was starting to get under my skin in ways I had never anticipated. He was pushing past boundaries I had set for myself, touching parts of me, physically and emotionally, that I swore no man would ever reach. It was both exhilarating and terrifying, the push and pull between control and surrender, between desire and doubt. Sitting up in bed, I rubbed my temples, trying to clear my mind. Outside, the soft patter of rain against my window became more insistent, matching the rhythm of my racing thoughts. A quick flash of lightning illuminated the sky, followed by a low rumble of thunder in the distance. There was a storm coming, both physically and metaphorically, and if I was going to succeed in navigating the treacherous waters ahead, I needed to keep my wits about me. As the rain intensified, I heard a soft tapping at my bedroom door, breaking through my thoughts. I ran my fingers through my hair, gathering my composure. "Come in!" I called out, my voice quieter than I intended. The door creaked open, and to my surprise, my mother entered, her face warm and gentle, despite the late hour. She was dressed in a soft robe, her hair slightly tousled from sleep, yet her eyes held a brightness, an awareness that told me she had been awake and worrying, just as I had been. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice soft but serious. I gave her a small smile, scooting over on the bed to make space for her. "Of course," I said, my curiosity piqued by the urgency in her tone. As she closed the door behind her and sat beside me on the bed, I noticed the familiar lines of concern etched into her face, deeper than I'd seen before. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of the rain on the window filled the silence, its rhythm almost soothing, yet the tension in the air was unmistakable. I knew this wasn't just a casual late-night conversation. "You've been struggling, haven't you?" she finally said, her eyes searching mine. "About Adrian, about the decisions you're facing." I nodded, sighing as I leaned back against the headboard. "It's all so much, Mom. The merger with Adrian, what it could mean for the family. I can't shake the feeling that I'm on the verge of making the wrong decision." She reached out, taking my hand in hers, her touch warm and reassuring. "I know how hard this is for you. But Juliet, the reality is, we're running out of time." I frowned, confusion washing over me. "What do you mean?" Her eyes softened, but there was a sadness there, something I hadn't seen before. "Your father, he's not doing well." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I sat up straighter, the gravity of her statement sinking in. What do you mean? He's not doing well. He didn't tell me." "He didn't want to worry you," she interrupted gently, squeezing my hand. "He's been sick for a while now, but he's been keeping it from you. For most people. It's getting worse, Juliet. The doctors don't think he'll last a year." I felt the air leave my lungs, my heart pounding in my chest. "Why didn't you tell me?" She sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "Your father wanted to protect you. He didn't want this burden on your shoulders while you were dealing with everything else. But now, with everything that's happening with the company, with Adrian, we don't have the luxury of waiting any longer." I blinked, trying to process the weight of what she was saying. My father was dying, and I had no idea. "And the merger with Adrian?" I asked, my voice small, unsure. "That's part of it," she said, her tone growing more serious. "Your father has been holding the company together, but once he's gone, there's no one left to take over. The board will swoop in, and they'll tear everything apart. We need someone strong, someone with the resources to keep everything intact." "Adrian," I whispered, the realization sinking in. She nodded. "Your father believes that if you marry Adrian, if you merge our family with his, he'll be able to step in and protect what your father has built. And honestly, Juliet, I agree with him." My chest tightened, the weight of her words pressing down on me like a vice. "You want me to marry him? To hand over control to him?" She shook her head, her expression softening. "No, not hand over control. Adrian has the power, the influence, to protect our legacy. But you, Juliet, you're the heart of this family. You'll keep everything together. I looked away, staring out the window as the rain continued to pour. The flashes of lightning were becoming more frequent now, the thunder louder, closer. The storm was almost here. I don't know if I can trust him, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. My mother sighed, reaching out to gently touch my arm. I can't tell you whether to trust him or not. Only you can decide that. But I do know this. Adrian is powerful, and he's smart. He sees your strength, Juliet. That's why he's drawn to you. Together, you could build something incredible. Something that will outlast all of us. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words settle deep within me. I had been fighting this. Fighting Adrian, fighting the idea of giving up control. But if my father was sick, if our family's legacy was truly at risk, maybe I didn't have the time I thought I had. And if I don't do this? I asked, my voice trembling. Her eyes grew sad, and she gave me a small, rueful smile. Then we'll lose everything. The company, the influence. Everything your father worked for. I sat there, staring at the rain, feeling the storm outside reflect the turmoil inside me. I had spent so much time fighting for control, for independence. But now, faced with the reality of my father's illness, with the looming threat of losing everything, maybe Adrian wasn't just a risk. Maybe he was the solution. I don't know what to do, I whispered, feeling the tears prick the corners of my eyes. My mother wrapped her arm around me, pulling me close. It's okay to be scared, Juliet. You don't have to have all the answers right now. But whatever decision you make, I know you'll do it with the best intentions. I trust you. We sat like that for a long time, my head resting on her shoulder as we listened to the rain. The room was dark, illuminated only by the occasional flash of lightning. But there was a warmth between us, a sense of shared understanding that soothed some of the tension in my chest. I just wish we had more time, I murmured. She kissed the top of my head gently, her voice soft. So do I. But life doesn't always give us the time we want. We talked quietly for the rest of the night, discussing the future, the possibilities, what a merger with Adrian could mean for the family. The conversation was heavy but necessary, and by the time dawn began to break, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The decision was mine to make, and while the weight of it felt immense, I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. As the first light of morning crept into the room, my mother kissed my forehead, her hand resting gently on my cheek. Whatever happens, Juliet, I'll be here for you. I nodded, my heart full of gratitude and love for this woman who had always stood by me, no matter how difficult things had become. She stood up, smoothing her robe before making her way to the door. Rest, my darling. You'll need your strength for the decisions ahead. With that, she left, closing the door softly behind her, leaving me alone with my thoughts, the remnants of the storm still echoing in the distance. I lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything that had been said. My father was sick. My family needed saving. And Adrian. He was at the center of it all. As the dawn light spilled through the window, I realized that my decision had already been made. Now, I just needed to have the courage to follow through. Reaching for the phone, I hit the number I was dreading. As the voice on the other end came alive, I could only say one thing. We're out of time. Are you ready to make our move? Chapter 15. The Gathering Storm. The morning of our planned strike against Sterling Enterprises arrived like a slow-building storm, the weight of it settling over me like a suffocating fog. For days, Adrian, Jackson, and I had been meticulously preparing, going over every possible detail, every potential pitfall. But now that the moment was upon us, my anxiety had become almost unbearable. The stakes were astronomical. If we failed, we would lose everything. Our power, our leverage, our future. And though Adrian's confidence never wavered, a quiet voice in the back of my mind whispered that something could go terribly wrong. Are you ready? Adrian's voice snapped me from my thoughts. He stood by the window, his silhouette bathed in the soft evening light streaming into the penthouse. The city beyond looked calm, indifferent to the battle that was about to unfold. Adrian exuded his usual air of ruthless control, his tailored suit a perfect fit, every detail meticulously in place. But today, There was something different about him, a tightness around his jaw, a sharper edge to the intensity in his eyes. Even he, for all his bravado, knew how high the stakes were. "I'm ready," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I took a deep breath, but my pulse betrayed me, thundering in my chest. "We should go over the plan one more time." Adrian's smile was confident, almost too relaxed. "It's simple," he said, stepping toward me, his voice a low hum of control. "We gather the stockholders and CEOs of the companies Sterling has lost. We present them with a strategy for an acquisition merger. If all goes according to plan, we'll walk out of there holding a majority share of their assets. And once we control those companies, we'll have the power to initiate a hostile takeover of Sterling." I stood there, the enormity of what we were about to do hitting me like a wave. My throat felt dry, my hands slightly trembling. I had known this was the plan, had rehearsed every move with Adrian and Jackson, but now, standing on the precipice, it felt overwhelming. "Sounds good," I managed to say, though the words felt distant. Adrian must have sensed my unease. He stepped closer, closing the space between us in an instant. His hand gently lifted my chin, forcing me to look into his eyes, those piercing eyes that had a way of pulling me in, of making everything else disappear. His touch was warm, commanding, and I felt the pull of him, but how he held over me. "And then the best part," he murmured, his voice low and sultry, sending a shiver down my spine. "When everything is said and done, we come back here and celebrate." His lips curled into a crooked grin, one that promised far more than just a victory toast. "And this time, I won't stop." His words were laced with both a promise and a challenge, and as he leaned in, his lips capturing mine, I felt the fire between us ignite. The heat of his touch, the raw intensity of his kiss, sent a surge of desire through me that nearly knocked me off my feet. The world outside, the corporate warfare, the risks, the tension, melted away, leaving only the two of us consumed by the moment. I kissed him back hard, letting the rush of passion overwhelm me for a moment. His hand slid down my back, pulling me even closer, and I could feel the fire building between us, threatening to consume us both. His lips moved against mine with a hunger that mirrored my own, and for a moment I teetered on the edge of losing control completely. It took everything in me to stop, to pull back before the moment spiraled out of control. My breathing was ragged, and I could see the same fire burning in Adrian's eyes. His grip on me tightened as if he too was fighting the urge to let go, to give in entirely. "Not yet," I whispered, my voice breathless but resolute. "We have a hostile takeover to execute first." Adrian grinned, his thumb brushing over my lower lip in a way that made my heart skip a beat. "Then let's make sure we win so we can finish what we started." He stepped back. The tension between us lingered in the air, crackling like electricity. I felt the loss of his warmth the second he moved away, but I knew I had to stay focused. The fire could wait, for now. With one last smoldering look, Adrian turned and led the way to the door, his confidence infectious, his steps purposeful. I followed, my heart still racing, my body still buzzing with the remnants of our kiss. The storm wasn't just coming, it was already here, and I was ready to face it. When we arrived at Rockford Industrial, the atmosphere was electric. I could feel the pulse of anxiety and tension as we walked through the sleek, modern lobby. Jackson was already in position, ready to set our plan into motion. "Are you ready?" he asked, his demeanor calm, but I could see the excitement in his eyes. "Let's do it," Adrian replied, determination etched across his features. As we made our way to the conference room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt thick with anticipation, and I could almost hear the clock ticking down to our moment of truth. Once inside the conference room, we were greeted by a group of Rockford's top executives, their expressions skeptical but curious. I could feel their eyes scrutinizing us as we settled into our seats, the tension palpable. "Let's get started," one of the executives said, his tone sharp. "We have a lot to discuss." Adrian and I exchanged a quick glance, and I felt a rush of adrenaline. We were ready for this. We had a plan, and we were determined to see it through. As Adrian began presenting our proposal, I felt my confidence growing. He spoke with conviction, outlining the benefits of our partnership and how we could offer value that Sterling could not. I chimed in with key points, backing up his claims with facts and figures. The more I spoke, the more I could feel the energy shift in the room. But just as things began to flow smoothly, a voice interrupted from the back of the room. "Excuse me, but isn't it a bit ironic that you're presenting this proposal after everything we've heard about your activities?" I turned to see Mark Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Enterprises, leaning against the doorframe, a smirk on his face. My stomach dropped. He had arrived unexpectedly, and his presence sent a ripple of tension through the room. "What do you mean?" Adrian replied, his expression unfazed, but I could see the tension in his jaw. "I mean, we've been hearing some rather interesting rumors about your little operation," Mark said, stepping further into the room, confidence radiating from him. "It seems your plan to undermine us has already come to light." Adrian's expression hardened. "Rumors can be misleading, Mark. We're here to present a legitimate proposal." "Legitimate?" Mark laughed, cutting him off. "You think you can come in here, make your demands, and we won't notice? You've been playing a dangerous game, Adrian." I felt the tension in the room escalate, and I exchanged a worried glance with Adrian. This wasn't part of the plan. "We're not here to play games," Adrian said, his voice steady. There was an edge to it. "We're offering a partnership that will benefit both our companies." Mark crossed his arms, his expression smug. "A partnership. We're a hostile takeover disguised as a proposal. You've underestimated us, and it's going to cost you." The atmosphere in the room shifted, and I could sense the executives looking at each other, their loyalty wavering. The confidence we had built began to crumble as Mark's words sank in. I stepped forward, trying to regain control. "We're offering value and a chance for both our companies to thrive," I said, my voice firm. "This is an opportunity, not a threat." Mark turned his attention to me, his smile condescending. "And why should we trust you? You're just a pawn in Adrian's game." "Because I'm not a pawn," I shot back, my voice steady. "I'm here because I believe in what we're proposing. I'm not afraid to fight for it." Mark's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing as he sized me up. "You think you can intimidate me with bravado? This is business, not a game of chess." "Exactly," Adrian interjected, his voice sharp. "And that's why we're here. To show you that we're not just playing. We're serious." The tension in the room thickened, and I could see the executives shifting uncomfortably. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me, and I knew I had to act fast. "Let's make this a fair fight," I suggested, my heart racing. "We can open the books and show our intentions. Let's put everything on the table and see if we can find common ground." Mark's smirk faltered, and for a moment I saw uncertainty flash in his eyes. But then he recovered, crossing his arms defiantly. "You really think I'm going to fall for that?" "Why not?" I pressed. "If you truly believe you're stronger, then what do you have to lose? We're offering transparency." Adrian's gaze flicked to me, surprise etched across his features. I could see he was caught off guard, but I pressed on, willing to take the risk. Mark hesitated, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind. The room fell silent as he considered my proposal. Then, everything began to shift, crumble beneath our fingers. At the door, a tall man dressed in a suit stood there, leaning up against the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt." As the voice filled the air, you could hear a pin drop. It was Carter Hamilton. Chapter 16. The Unraveling. Mark hesitated, his brow furrowing as he mulled over my proposal. The tension in the room was palpable, and for the briefest moment, I thought we had him. The other executives sat in uneasy silence, eyes darting between Mark, Adrian, and me. We were so close to tipping the balance in our favor. Then everything shifted. The atmosphere, once tense but manageable, began to crack, crumbling beneath our fingertips. It started with a low murmur, and then, at the door, a figure appeared, tall, commanding, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. He leaned casually against the doorway as though he owned the room. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "But can anyone join this little powwow?" The voice alone sent a jolt of electricity through the air, and every head turned toward the door. The room, already tense, froze completely. I heard the collective intake of breath as the weight of the moment settled in. It was Carter Hamilton. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The man who had just waltzed into the most critical meeting of our careers with an air of arrogance was none other than the person I had hoped wouldn't get involved in this war. But here he was, leaning against the doorframe like he had all the time in the world, and yet, somehow, had already seized control of the room. Mark, still seated, blinked in surprise, clearly caught off guard. "Carter," he said slowly, his voice filled with uncertainty. "I wasn't aware you had any business here today." Carter's lips curled into a smug smile. "Oh, I do now. Figured I'd drop in, see how things were progressing. I mean, after all, this merger has potential, but I think you're missing the full picture. And I happen to have an offer you might want to consider." His gaze swept across the room, finally resting on Adrian and me, sizing us up as if we were nothing more than chess pieces on a board. Adrian's posture stiffened beside me, the air between us taut with tension. "We've already presented our proposal, Carter," Adrian said, his voice low and controlled. "If you're here to cause problems—" "Oh, no! No problems!" Carter interjected, raising a hand as if to calm the room, though the gleam in his eyes suggested the exact opposite. "I'm just here to give everyone some perspective. You know, broaden the horizons a little." His tone was condescending, and it grated against my already frayed nerves. I exchanged a quick glance with Adrian, my pulse quickening. We had been blindsided. Carter wasn't just here to make idle conversation. He was here to upend everything. Mark, still caught between intrigue and caution, gestured to the room. "All right, Carter," he said, his voice measured. "If you've got something to say, go ahead." Carter pushed off the doorframe and walked toward the center of the room with the kind of confidence that came from years of dominating boardrooms and bulldozing over competition. He moved with precision, his eyes never leaving the executives, as if already planting seeds of doubt in their minds. "Thank you, Mark. Gentlemen, ladies," he began, his voice steady and assured. "I won't take up too much of your time. I understand you've been presented with a rather interesting merger proposal today." He shot a glance at Adrian and me, his smile sharp as though daring us to respond. We remained silent. "I'll admit," Carter continued, his tone shifting into something more persuasive, "what Adrian and Juliet here are offering isn't without merit. It's ambitious, sure, but—" He paused for effect, his gaze sweeping the room, ensuring every eye was locked on him. "Ambition doesn't always translate into the kind of stability you all need, especially when there are better, more secure options on the table." A ripple of unease passed through the room. The executives were watching him closely now, some nodding ever so slightly, their attention fully captured. He had them, and he knew it. Mark leaned forward, curious. "And I assume you're here to present one of those better options, Carter?" Carter chuckled, as if amused that it wasn't already obvious. "You assume correctly, Mark." Adrian stiffened beside me, his eyes narrowing as Carter continued. "Let's talk about stability, about the kind of deal that secures not just your company's future, but the future of your shareholders, your families, your legacy." He paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. "What I'm offering is simple, a more controlled, predictable acquisition, one that doesn't rely on risky, hostile moves. One that keeps you all in positions of strength rather than pushing you into Adrian's, shall we say, aggressive, unpredictable path." My heart pounded in my chest as I realized what he was doing. Carter wasn't just here to disrupt. He was offering a counter-proposal, one designed to make our deal look unstable, reckless. He was painting us as the risk, and himself as the safety net. Adrian stepped forward, his voice cold. "This is nothing but a distraction, Carter. You're here because you want to tear down what we've built and replace it with more of the same old tactics. You don't want to innovate. You want to maintain the status quo." Carter shrugged, his gaze never wavering. "Maybe I'm offering these fine people a way to protect themselves from unnecessary risk. That's something worth thinking about, don't you think?" He turned back to the executives, his smile disarming. "You've all worked too hard to watch it crumble under a hostile takeover, haven't you?" I watched, feeling the pit in my stomach grow, as the expressions around the table shifted from intrigue to concern. He was turning them, little by little, with every calculated word. I could see it happening in real time, like sand slipping through my fingers. And let's not forget, Carter added, his voice dropping to a more serious tone, the history between Adrian's family and the Sterlings is a history built on deception, rivalry, and destruction. Is that what you want to invite into your business? He didn't need to say more. The seed had been planted, and the room was already shifting in his favor. Every hesitation, every skeptical look directed toward us. Carter had orchestrated it perfectly. Then, as if to deliver the final blow, Carter turned to the group of executives from Rockford Industries, the most influential players in the room. "You don't need to decide now," he said smoothly, his eyes locking onto theirs. "But I suggest you weigh your options very carefully." One by one, the executives from Rockford stood, their faces unreadable. The leader of their group, a tall man with salt and pepper hair, adjusted his suit jacket and looked around the room. "We'll need time to consider all proposals," he said, his voice steady. The tension in the room skyrocketed. Adrian's fists clenched. They said nothing. I could feel the air growing heavier as Rockford's team gathered their belongings and made their way toward the door. The silence that followed their exit was suffocating. No one spoke. No one moved. We had lost them. And Carter knew it. With one last triumphant glance around the room, Carter gave a satisfied nod. "Well, I suppose that's my cue. I'll leave you all to it." He turned on his heel, walking out of the room as casually as he'd entered, his presence lingering long after he'd gone. The moment the door clicked shut, I felt the full weight of what had just happened sink in. Carter hadn't just disrupted the meeting. He had planted doubt so deep that we might never claw our way back. And now, everything we had worked for was hanging by a thread. After the meeting wrapped up, I found myself walking out of the conference room alongside Adrian. The air outside felt electric, a stark contrast to the tension that had filled the room. "Well," Adrian said, glancing sideways at me, "that could have gone worse." I shot him a skeptical look. "You mean aside from Mark trying to undermine us at every turn and Carter just planting the seeds of doubt?" "Yeah, it was the best outcome I could have imagined." "He's always been like that," Adrian replied, his expression hardening. "He sees any challenge as a threat. But we held our ground. That's what matters." "Maybe," I said, still feeling the unease settle in my stomach. "But I can't shake the feeling that he's not done yet. He's got something up his sleeve. Let him plot. We've made our move, and now it's time for him to react," Adrian said, his confidence unwavering. "This is how the game is played." "Right, the game," I said, feeling the weight of his words. "But what happens when the game changes?" Adrian turned to face me, a flicker of concern crossing his features. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we're playing with fire," I said, my voice low. "What if Sterling retaliates? What if my father finds out what I'm doing? What if this all blows up in our faces?" Adrian stepped closer, his presence commanding. "Juliet, you can't let fear dictate your actions. If you want to win this, you have to embrace the chaos." "Embrace the chaos?" I echoed, incredulous. "That's your plan? Just hope for the best?" "No," he replied, his tone firm. "My plan is to outmaneuver them, to stay one step ahead. But I can't do this without you." "Without me?" I said, skepticism creeping into my voice. "What if you're the one I can't trust?" "Then don't trust me," he said, his gaze unwavering. "Trust the plan. Trust the information we have. But whatever you do, don't second-guess yourself." I nodded slowly, absorbing his words. There was a flicker of determination in his eyes that made my heart race. I wanted to believe in this partnership, but I knew I had to tread carefully. "Fine," I said finally. "But I need to know everything. No more secrets, Adrian." He nodded, his expression serious. "Agreed. I'll keep you in the loop. We're in this together." As we walked back toward the elevator, I felt a strange sense of resolve settling over me. I was stepping into dangerous territory, but for the first time, I felt like I was taking control of my destiny. I lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, the events of the day replaying in my mind over and over like an endless loop. What had I done? The implications of my choices were beginning to settle in, heavier with each passing minute. The tangled web I had spun, carefully constructed around lies and manipulation, was now tightening, and I was at the center of it all. Adrian thought he had me, thought he could control the game, control me, that he was wrong. The pieces I had set into motion were already moving in ways he couldn't anticipate. I had made sure of that. Beneath my outward support for him, I was weaving a far more intricate plan, a plan to take everything, to take him down. The phone on my nightstand rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I reached for it, my pulse quickening. I already knew who it was. "Hello," I answered, my voice soft but steady. For a moment, there was silence on the other end, and then a voice, smooth and self-assured, came alive. That couldn't have gone any better. It was Carter. I sat up in bed, a smile tugging at the corners of my lips as I ran my fingers through my hair, pushing it back from my face. "You're right," I said, my voice calm, betraying none of the exhilaration racing through me. It couldn't have. No one knew the truth. No one suspected that while Adrian and I played our game of corporate warfare, I was orchestrating a far more dangerous play behind the scenes. Adrian thought he was pulling the strings, that he had me on his side, but he didn't realize I was playing him just as much as he was playing everyone else. While I had been gathering information on Sterling and Rockford, positioning myself as Adrian's key strategist, I had also been gathering every bit of intel I could on him, on Adrian. And I wasn't just planning a merger, I was planning his downfall, the ultimate hostile takeover. My father's company wasn't going to fall into Adrian's hands. I wouldn't let him or anyone else control the legacy my father had built. To do that, I needed an ally, someone who wanted to take Adrian out of the game as badly as I did, and that someone was Carter. "So, what's our next move?" I asked, leaning back against the pillows, my heart still racing but my voice steady. Carter was silent for a moment, the weight of his next words hanging in the air. Then he spoke, his voice laced with satisfaction. "We're having another meeting tomorrow. The board was impressed with what we'd brought to the table. When we merge our two companies and take the majority of Rockford's holdings, there will be no stopping us." My heart thudded in my chest, a rush of adrenaline coursing through me. Perfect! The plan was unfolding just as we'd envisioned. Adrian's empire would crumble, and I would be the one standing over the ashes. No one would see it coming. "Excellent," I replied, a satisfied smile creeping onto my lips. But just as I was about to say more, a soft knock came at my door. I turned, frowning, as the door creaked open. My mother stood in the doorway, her face pale and grim. Her usual warmth and calmness were gone, replaced by an expression that sent a cold chill through me. Our eyes met, and I knew instantly something was terribly wrong. "I'll call you tomorrow," I whispered into the phone, my voice low. "Something has come up." Carter didn't argue, sensing the shift in my tone. "I'll be waiting," he said, before the line went dead. I lowered the phone and set it aside, my attention fully on my mother. She stepped further into the room, closing the door behind her, but the look on her face didn't change. The air in the room felt heavier now, and the pit in my stomach deepened. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She stood there for a moment, as if gathering her strength before her lips finally parted, her voice trembling. "Your father." I didn't need her to finish the sentence. The weight of those two words hit me like a freight train, the world around me suddenly tilting. "What happened?" I asked, my voice cracking, my heart pounding in my chest. "He's taken a turn for the worse," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. "The doctors. They don't think he'll make it through the night." The blood drained from my face, my entire body going numb as the reality of her words sank in. My father. The man I had been fighting for, the man whose legacy I had been trying to protect with every calculated move. He was slipping away. Without a word, I pushed the covers off and stood, my legs shaky beneath me. I walked over to her, taking her hands in mine, but all the confidence, all the control I had felt moments ago was gone, replaced by fear, by helplessness. "We need to go to him," I whispered. She nodded, her own composure barely holding as she squeezed my hands tightly. "We'll go." "But Juliet." Her voice trailed off, her expression full of pain. "You need to be ready. You need to decide what happens next." I nodded, but the weight of the decision hung over me like a guillotine. My father's company, the empire I had been trying to save, it was now up to me. The plan I had set into motion with Carter was working, but I hadn't anticipated this. I hadn't anticipated losing the very reason I was fighting so hard, and now, the next move was mine to make. With my mother at my side, I walked toward the door, my mind swirling with 1,000 thoughts. The storm I had unleashed with Carter was far from over, but tonight, my world had shifted. I was no longer just playing the game. Now, I was facing the consequences, and there was no going back. Chapter 17. Father's Final Words. The walk to my father's room felt like it took forever, the halls stretching endlessly before me. Each step was heavier than the last, the weight of what was coming pressing down on me with unbearable force. My mother stayed close by, her presence a steadying hand on my shoulder, but even she couldn't soften the dread building inside me. I wasn't ready for this. How could anyone be ready to say goodbye? When we reached his room, the door was slightly ajar, and I hesitated. For a moment I just stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, unsure of whether I could face what was inside. My father, my rock, the man who had always seemed larger than life, was slipping away, and no amount of corporate maneuvering or strategic brilliance could stop what was happening now. My mother gave me a gentle nod, her eyes filled with understanding, and I finally pushed the door open. The room was dimly lit, the soft hum of machines the only sound. My father lay in the bed, his once powerful frame now frail and sunken, his skin pale. His eyes, though half closed, flickered toward me as I entered, and for a brief moment I saw the man I had always known. The strength, the pride, but it was fleeting, and I could see how weak he had become. "Juliet," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. I crossed the room in seconds, taking a seat by his bedside and reaching for his hand. His grip was weak, but it was still there, still him. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to smile even though the tears were already threatening to spill. "Hi, Dad," I whispered, squeezing his hand gently. "I'm here." He gave a small nod, the corners of his lips lifting ever so slightly. "I knew you'd come." For a long moment, neither of us said anything. I just sat there, holding his hand, listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor, trying to wrap my mind around the fact that this might be the last time I ever saw him, the last time I ever heard his voice. "I'm so sorry, Juliet," he said suddenly, his voice trembling with emotion. "For everything. For putting all of this on you." I shook my head quickly, my throat tightening. "No, Dad. Don't. Don't apologize. You've done everything for this family. I wouldn't be who I am without you." His eyes, clouded with pain, softened as they met mine. "But I asked too much of you. I always knew you'd be strong enough, but I wanted you to have your own life. Not this. Pressure. Not the company." Tears stung at the corners of my eyes, and I blinked them away, refusing to let them fall. "I've made my choices, Dad. I'm not doing this because you asked me to. I'm doing this because I believe in what you built, in what our family stands for." He coughed, wincing as he tried to speak again. I wanted you to be happy." "I am happy," I insisted, my voice shaking. "I'm doing this because I love you, because I want to make you proud." A tear slid down my cheek, and this time I didn't bother wiping it away. I leaned forward, resting my forehead against his hand, overwhelmed by the rush of emotion that surged through me. "I'm scared, Dad," I whispered. "I don't know if I'm ready for this. To take on everything." His fingers twitched weakly in my grip, and when I looked up, I saw a flicker of the old fire in his eyes. "You are," he said, his voice stronger than before. "You've always been ready. Stronger than you know. Smarter than anyone in that damn boardroom. You don't need me to tell you that." "But I do," I replied, my voice cracking. "I need you." His smile was faint, but filled with a kind of warmth that made my heart ache. I'll always be with you, Juliet. In here. He raised a shaky hand and tapped his chest. In everything you do. You'll carry me and your mother and the legacy of this family. And I know you'll make us proud. I bit down on my lip, fighting the sob that was clawing its way up my throat. I don't want to do this without you. I know, sweetheart, he whispered, his voice soft and full of love. You'll have to. And you'll be magnificent. He shifted slightly in the bed, grimacing in pain, but his eyes stayed locked on mine. The company. It's yours now. Protect it. Protect our family. Make it what you always knew it could be. I nodded, my heart breaking, but I knew I had to be strong for him, even now. I will, I promised. I'll take care of everything. I won't let you down. A small sigh of relief escaped him, and for a moment he seemed at peace. I never doubted you, Juliet. Not for a second. I felt the tears slip down my cheeks, but I couldn't bring myself to speak. My throat was too tight, my heart too full of pain. I just sat there holding his hand, knowing that this was goodbye. I love you, he murmured, his voice barely audible now. More than words could ever say. I love you too, Dad, I whispered, my voice trembling as I leaned in and kissed his forehead. So much. His breathing slowed, and I could feel the life slipping from him, the warmth of his skin fading as his grip on my hand loosened. But his eyes never left mine, even as the light in them dimmed, the love he had for me and for our family shining through to the very end. Take care of them. Of everything. His voice was barely a whisper, the final words hanging in the air like a blessing. For me. And then he was gone. The machines beeped steadily for a few more moments before falling silent, the room growing still. The tears came then, hot and fast, spilling over as I clung to his hand, feeling the emptiness where his presence had once been. My father was gone, but his love, his legacy, those would stay with me forever. And now it was my turn to carry the weight of it, to ensure that what he built, what he believed in, would live on. For him, for us. Chapter 18. The Weight of Loss. The funeral was over in minutes, yet the weight of it lingered, crushing me in ways I hadn't expected. My father, gone. The man who had shaped my life, my ambition, everything I had become. Now it was all on me. I stood by his grave as the final shovels of dirt covered his casket. The cold breeze cut through me, but I barely felt it. All I could focus on was the void left behind. My mother had quietly urged me to leave, but I needed this moment alone, to grasp the enormity of what was now mine to protect. The company, the legacy, my family's future. Could I really do it? The question had gnawed at me since his last words. My father had believed in me, believed I was strong enough to lead. But now, with him gone, the doubts crept in like shadows. The choices I'd made, the alliances, the betrayals, they felt precarious, like a game I wasn't sure I could win. I sat on the bench beside the grave, burying my face in my hands. I had lied, manipulated, and aligned myself with people like Carter, all to secure our future. But had I gone too far? Was I playing a game I couldn't control? I don't know if I can do this, I whispered, the weight of it all threatening to break me. But as I closed my eyes, I heard my father's voice, steady and firm. You've always been ready. You're stronger than you think. I straightened, wiping my eyes. He believed in me. But that meant I had to believe in myself. There was no choice now. I had to protect the company, the family. For him, for us. Standing, I walked back toward the car, where my mother waited. Her face was pale, but her eyes were full of the same quiet strength I'd seen in my father's. She reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. You'll be fine, Juliet. You were meant for this. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I'll do what needs to be done. Your father knew you would, she said softly. As we drove away, I felt the shift. This wasn't just grief. It was resolve. I would lead. I would carry the weight of this legacy, no matter the cost. Because now, There was no turning back. The phone buzzed beside me as I sat at my father's desk. A stack of papers I hadn't bothered to look through scattered in front of me. I picked it up, seeing Carter's name flash on the screen. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to breathe. "Carter," I answered, my voice calm, trying to push the weight of the day aside. "Juliet." His voice came through soft, almost gentle. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Truly, I can't imagine what you're going through right now. I just wanted you to know I'm here if you need anything." There was a brief pause, and I leaned back in the chair, closing my eyes. "Thank you," I replied, feeling the familiar strain of emotions building again. "It means a lot." "Look, don't worry about the business right now," he continued, his tone smooth and reassuring. "I'll handle everything. You need time. Time to process everything." "I don't have time," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "The decision with Rockford is coming, and I can't afford to sit this out." Carter hesitated for a moment, and I could almost feel the shift in his demeanor. "Rockford is leading our way," he said confidently. "They see the potential in our merger. Once we secure their backing, Adrian won't be a threat. You'll have the control you need, Juliet." "We'll have the control." I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "Good," I said, trying to muster the enthusiasm I should feel. But instead, a hollow feeling crept into my chest. It all felt off. Carter had become such an integral part of my plan, my safety net in this ruthless game of power, but something wasn't sitting right. Why did it feel like I was losing more than I was gaining? The phone buzzed again in my hand, and I glanced at the screen. "Adrian." For a moment, I froze, staring at his name. Carter kept talking, going over the finer points of our strategy, but I didn't hear him. All I could focus on was Adrian's name lighting up on my phone. I sent the call to voicemail, shoving down the surge of guilt that rose with it. I couldn't deal with Adrian right now, not with everything else, not with the lies I was tangled in. "Juliet." Carter's voice cut through my thoughts, his tone shifting with concern. "You still with me?" "Yeah," I replied quickly, pushing the distraction of Adrian away. "I'm here. So, what's the next move?" Carter paused, as if considering his words. "We'll reconvene with Rockford tomorrow. They've been impressed with our proposal. The merger is just within reach. Once it's official, there's no stopping us. Adrian's push for control will be dead in the water." "Right," I said, but my voice sounded distant, even to me. The weight of everything was pulling me down again, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if I was making the right choice. The decisions I had made, the partnerships I had built with Carter, they felt like they were closing in on me. Was this really what my father would have wanted? "Juliet," Carter's voice softened, "you're going to make it through this. And when you do, company will be stronger than ever. We'll be stronger." I forced a smile, even though I knew he couldn't see it. "Thanks, Carter," I said. "I'll call you tomorrow." I hung up before he could say anything else, my fingers trembling as I set the phone down. The silence in the room seemed to expand, pressing in on me from all sides. The plan was working. Carter and I were on the verge of taking everything. But why did it feel like I was losing a part of myself in the process? My chest tightened, and I suddenly felt like I couldn't breathe. The weight of my father's death, the constant maneuvering, the lies. I couldn't hold it together anymore. The phone buzzed again, Adrian's name flashing once more, but I ignored it. I couldn't talk to him. Not now. Not after everything I had done. I stood up abruptly, the chairs scraping against the floor as I moved. I needed air. I needed something. Without thinking, I walked out of the room and down the hall, my legs moving on their own as I headed toward the only place I could think of, the library. The door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, I could see the glow of the fireplace casting flickering shadows across the walls. My mother sat in her usual chair, her gaze fixed on the flames, her face unreadable. For a moment, I hesitated. She had been so strong throughout all of this, and I didn't want to burden her with my doubts, my failures, but I couldn't hold it in any longer. I needed her. I stepped into the room, my breath catching in my throat. "We need to talk." She looked up, her eyes meeting mine, and in that instant, I saw the understanding there. She didn't say anything, but her expression told me she knew. knew the weight I was carrying, the choices I had made. I moved toward her, my heart pounding in my chest as the fire crackled softly behind us. And then, silence. Chapter 19. The Queen's Gambit. The air in the Rockford conference room was thick with tension, so palpable it felt as though it might snap at any moment. I sat in the middle of the long mahogany table, my heart pounding, keeping my expression calm, though inside I was anything but. On one side, Carter leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on Adrian across the room. They exchanged daggered looks, each one silently daring the other to make a move, each one bristling with the knowledge that only one could win. Adrian sat stiff, his hands steepled in front of him, his gaze hard and unyielding. His presence radiated controlled anger, the kind that made the air around him seem electric. I could feel it. The storm that was about to break between them, one way or another. They both thought they were in control, both thought they had me, and this deal, exactly where they wanted. But they were wrong. The silence stretched, uncomfortable, as we waited for the final player to enter the room. Then, finally, the door creaked open, and every head turned toward it. In walked Margaret Clark. Her presence alone made the room shift. She was the kind of woman who didn't need to speak to command authority. Her posture, her gaze, everything about her exuded power. Margaret Clark wasn't just any executive. She was the driving force behind Rockford Industries, the linchpin that held it all together. And if anyone in this room had the final say, it was her. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice even but sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. She didn't wait for a response as she strode to the head of the table, taking her place as if the entire room belonged to her. In some ways, it did. Adrian and Carter shifted in their seats, their eyes following her every movement. I remained still, my heart racing, but my mind focused. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment everything would come together or fall apart. Margaret sat down, folding her hands on the table, her gaze sweeping across the room. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she let the silence settle in, as if testing each of us, measuring our reactions. Her eyes flicked over Adrian, then Carter, and finally landed on me. I met her gaze without flinching. "So," she began, her voice smooth, but with an edge, "we're here to discuss the merger. I've reviewed both proposals, Adrian's and Carter's." She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I'll admit, they are both compelling. The numbers, the potential for growth, it's all there. On paper, either deal could be beneficial for Rockford." The tension in the room grew thicker as she spoke, each word laden with implication. I could feel Adrian and Carter's gazes burn into me, both of them waiting for her to say the one thing that could tilt the balance in their favor. But I kept my face neutral, unreadable. Margaret continued, her eyes still scanning the room like a predator assessing its prey. "But I have some concerns." Adrian leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but forceful. "Concerns, Miss Clark?" "Juliet has been working closely with both Jackson and me on these proposals." Margaret turned her sharp gaze on him, and for the first time, I saw him falter, just slightly. "Yes, concerns," she said smoothly. "Mergers of this magnitude require more than just numbers and projections. They require trust, vision. And frankly, I'm not convinced either of you," her gaze flicked to Carter now, "understands what that truly means for Rockford." Carter sat up straighter, a forced smile on his face. "With all due respect, Margaret, I think we've more than proven our ability to bring Rockford into new market. Our partnership with Juliet—" "Juliet," Margaret interrupted, her eyes locking onto mine, "is exactly why I'm here today." Adrian stiffened in his seat, his gaze shifting to me. "We're aligned in what we want for Rockford's future." Carter nodded, his expression eager. "Juliet and I have been discussing this merger for months. We're on the same page." Margaret's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. Cold, calculating. "Is that so?" There was something in her tone, a dangerous edge that sent a ripple of unease through the room. Adrian and Carter exchanged uneasy glances, both sensing that something was off. Margaret leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms as she looked between the two of them. "I'm afraid you've both been Misled. The silence that followed was suffocating. Carter's smile faltered, and Adrian's gaze hardened. "What are you talking about?" Adrian demanded, his voice tight with suspicion. Margaret's eyes gleamed as she glanced at me, and I felt the weight of the moment settle over me like a heavy cloak. She was handing the floor to me. The time had come. I sat up straighter, meeting both Adrian's and Carter's bewildered gazes. "You both think you've been working with me," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm brewing in the room. "But the truth is, I've been playing both of you." Adrian's eyes widened, and Carter's mouth fell open in disbelief. "What?" Carter sputtered. "You're joking." "No," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm not. I've been gathering information, positioning myself, making sure that when the time came, I'd be the one in control. Neither of you are getting this merger. Rockford will never be yours." Adrian's face darkened, his jaw clenching. "You're playing a dangerous game, Juliet. And I'm winning," I shot back, my eyes cold. "You both thought you could use me, manipulate me into giving you control over my father's company. But I've been the one pulling the strings. This merger, it was never about you." Carter stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You can't do this. We had a deal." Margaret raised a hand, silencing him with a single gesture. "Enough," she said, her voice low but commanding. "Juliet is right. You've both been outplayed." Adrian's expression was unreadable now, his eyes locked on me with a mixture of fury and something else. Something darker, more dangerous. "You both came in here thinking you could dominate this deal," Margaret continued, her gaze shifting back to Adrian and Carter. "But Rockford will never work with either of you. The only person we're willing to work with is Juliet. If you want to do business with Rockford, you'll go through her." The room fell into stunned silence. Carter's face had turned ashen, and Adrian's fists clenched at his sides, barely containing his rage. Margaret rose from her chair, smoothing her jacket with deliberate calm. "I suggest you both think carefully about your next moves," she said, her voice icy, "because from now on Juliet is in charge." She glanced at me, a small nod of acknowledgement, before turning and walking out of the room. I stood, following her without hesitation, the weight of my triumph settling over me. As the door clicked shut behind us, I didn't look back. Inside, I knew Adrian and Carter were sitting in stunned silence, both of them reeling from the revelation that I had outmaneuvered them both. They had never seen it coming, and now the game was mine to play. Chapter 20. The Queen's Heart. The cemetery was quiet, save for the soft rustling of leaves in the trees and the occasional distant bird call. I sat on the cool grass, my gaze fixed on the name etched into the stone before me. Reinhardt. My last name. My father's name. The weight of it felt heavier than ever as I traced the letters with my fingers, trying to ground myself in the moment, trying to breathe through the suffocating mix of grief and responsibility. "I'm in control now, Dad," I whispered, my voice trembling just slightly. "I did it. The company is mine. Everything you built, everything you sacrificed for, it's safe." But it wasn't just about keeping it safe. It was about making it more. I could feel that desire burning deep inside me now. "I'm not going to just protect it," I continued, staring at the fresh earth. "I'm going to make it better. The merger with Rockford is just the beginning. This is my foundation, Dad. I'm going to build something lasting. Something more than just power and influence. A legacy that's about more than control." I swallowed hard, my chest tightening as the reality of the path I had chosen settled in. "And if anyone is going to win my heart," I whispered, my voice soft but resolute, "it's going to be for love. True love. Not for a merger. Not for the lust of power." The words came easily now, though the ache in my chest didn't lessen. I couldn't let myself be swayed by ambition or greed. Not again. I couldn't let anyone play me. For a few minutes, I sat there in silence, letting the cool air wrap around me, letting myself feel the weight of everything, of my father's absence, of the decisions I'd made, and of the future I was determined to shape. Then I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate. Without turning, I knew who it was. Adrian. He came to a stop just a few feet behind me, and I felt the warmth of his presence even before he spoke. "You took control," he said, his voice quiet but full of something more. "I didn't expect it, but I'm impressed." I didn't respond right away. I kept my eyes on the stone, my heart steadying as I took a deep breath. He was impressed. Of course he was. Adrian loved power, respected it, but he wasn't the one in control anymore. I was. Finally, I looked up, meeting his gaze. He stood there, hands in his pockets, his eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. There was admiration there, maybe even something close to respect. "I've always admired strong women," Adrian continued, stepping closer, his eyes never leaving mine. "You didn't just play the game, you changed it. And I can't help but wonder." He trailed off, his voice low, eyes flickering with a familiar intensity. "What if we played it together?" I felt a slow smile tug at my lips. Adrian always looking for the angle. "What are you saying?" I asked, watching him closely. He crouched down beside me, his expression open, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen before. "I'm saying that maybe there's potential for us. Something real. You're the kind of woman I want by my side, Juliet, and I think you know that." I looked into his eyes, my heart pounding with the weight of his words. For so long, I had let my feelings for him cloud my judgment, but I couldn't afford to fall into that trap again. I wasn't the same woman I'd been when this all started. I wasn't playing his game anymore. He was playing mine. "I had feelings for you," I said softly, watching the way his gaze sharpened at my admission. "Maybe I still do. But if you want to be with me, Adrian, it's going to be on my terms. You'll have to prove yourself worthy. I don't play for power anymore. If you want my heart, you'll have to earn it." He blinked, his expression unreadable for a moment, and then a slow, almost predatory smile curved his lips. "Worthy, huh?" I stood, brushing the grass from my dress as I turned to face him fully. The sun was setting behind me, casting long shadows across the cemetery, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly powerful. I stepped closer to him, feeling the heat of his breath as I moved within inches of his face. And then I kissed him. It was soft, brief, but enough to send a spark between us, the kind of electricity that always hummed beneath the surface when we were together. When I pulled back, I saw the surprise in his eyes, the question forming on his lips. "Well, what was that for?" he asked, his voice low and almost breathless. I placed my hand gently on the side of his face, my thumb brushing his cheek. "For tomorrow," I whispered, my voice laced with a challenge. "Let's see if you can play my game, Adrian. The prize is still in reach. If you're worthy." I stepped back, leaving him standing there, watching me with that familiar mix of awe and confusion. With one last glance, I turned and walked away, my heart steady, my resolve even stronger. As I walked into the distance, I didn't need to look back to know that Adrian was smiling, finally realizing what he'd always suspected, but had never quite understood. He wasn't the player in this game. He was the one being played. Thank you for listening to Zoey's Bedtime Stories, Juliet's Game. We hope you enjoyed this romantic journey. If you loved this story and want to hear more, please like, subscribe, and comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to visit zoeappletonwriter.com for even more passionate romance novels. Thank you again for tuning in. Good night and pleasant dreams.